our hearts, shed what us in our balls. The spirit and the flesh, the emotions that arrest. The cerebral will contest, propelling the unrest. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded. The teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, the world to you. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, the world to you. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. With the semblance of a blaze, with gratitude and rage, we touch another page with delirious delight, impervious to light. This vitality and might encourages the flight. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand. Stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, the world to you. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Guess I can give the world to you, the world to you. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. The world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, the world to you. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Hey. I didn't notice you there. Well, welcome. Welcome, one and all, ladies and gentlemen. How's everybody doing this evening? This evening, I'm coming to you from a remote location. And I have overheated cream. Overheated cream malfunction, ladies and gentlemen. My apologies for the horror. The horror! So, I'm in LA. So, first and foremost, I should apologize because I'm going to suck at certain things when I'm on the road. My road game, in other words, is not that good. Yet, as of yet. Road gear and road game. But I do have some decent road gear this time around. But, as usual, the road game is a little weak. And my glasses are somewhere. Somewhere, but today we are musing just because, right? We are musing about musing just because. Just because. Do, 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 do. Hello, everyone in the chat. As I said, gonna suck at reading certain things, seeing certain things, but I do see D Rock in the house, and shout out to D Rock for the Cash App. the unspecialist. Ladies and gentlemen, just because, just because, um, no, Chaos is not a studio, it's a apartment. Uh, just happened to be in LA, and I'll be staying here for a week. And maybe I'll set up in a different location when I stream tomorrow, maybe with a better view. But it's got a pretty sweet view over here. And when I arrived earlier today, by the way, I did a live stream just because I went on YouTube and I said, let me see how the algorithm reacts. Let me see how the people react. And while I was doing that stream, just because, a few things came up. A few things regarding use it or lose it, and a few things regarding doing it just because. Uh oh.
Morning, everybody. It's
It's
DJ
DJ Envy Angela Yee. The invasion of the spam, ladies and gentlemen. But we're in a exactly. The Breakfast Club is trying to hack the game. All right, they're trying to. Okay, so what are we really talking about today? Okay, we are musing as usual, and we have a topic which is just because. And in the very phrase just because, there are many things that we could glean, we could learn, that we could talk about, all the way from ultimate responsibility to survival to life is short, the YOLO sentiment, if you will. Okay? Many things that we could discuss around the campfire of just because. Shout out to Young Swift in the house. Always swift to hold it down. Swift and steady, ladies and gentlemen. YOLO. So, in the spirit of YOLO, I said, how about if we do this? How about if we have a free flowing conversation and I'll just drop also right from the get go. Since we are in Southern California having ourselves a good time, having ourselves a week's worth of away from the Bay time, away from the San Francisco Bay time, why don't we be whimsical? Just because. Just because. So the panel is open right from the start. However, let's get into this just because business. Okay, there are three things that I mentioned, or that I think I mentioned, or I think that somebody should have been paying attention to the fact that was mentioned, which is ultimate responsibility. Well, let's just stop at that one. Ultimate responsibility from a just because, you know? Yeah, we all know The story of the apple. The fruit of knowledge of good and evil. When God came down and asked Adam, Adam said, did he take responsibility? Let me get a one in the chat if Adam took responsibility when God came down and was looking for his naked self. Did Adam take responsibility when God said, what happened with the apple? What's the apple business? What happened? He said, it was the woman. And not just the woman, the woman which you gave me. That's like the double deflection right there. He said, it wasn't me, it was the woman that you, by the way, you and your drama, you were the one that brought this on. God asked Eve. Eve said it was the serpent. And guess what? The serpent didn't blame anybody else, did he? The serpent more or less went YOLO, right? He was like, just because, right? And it was well understood. He was the only one that took responsibility vis-a-vis what went wrong that day. The point of just because, and there is a point that everything gets to where it then becomes just because. If you ask why enough times, it becomes, well, that's just how it is. It becomes a how question. It becomes like well, that's how it just works. That's just how it is. It's just because. It's just because I did it just because is the ultimate form of taking responsibility, because you're not putting responsibility on any external reason, even reasons which could then be placed on external value systems. And well, I was born into the tribe of X and therefore they caused me to do Y. That's the reason. Or somebody told me to do it, or social pressure, or so on and so forth. But to say I did it just because, to do things just because, to understand how the world of just because works, is to understand the world of ultimate responsibility and also the power that comes along with that, okay? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, shout out to everyone rolling into the house. And I am here in LA without my glasses for the time being. But it's the it's the Blind Podcast on your dial. Yes, just because. That is the position of ultimate power as well, right? Notice how we started from the responsibility side. That to not blame anything, to say that you did something because you willed it to be. I just did it just because. That is ultimate responsibility. And it also sounds like something that someone in power would say. So we're just musing. We're musing about the word. Now, why? Why should we be musing about this? Shout out to Wayman Brown in the house. Why should we be musing about this? Well, one aspect that we can immediately glean from it is that we need to ask ourselves questions until we get to that just because part. And I'm going to immediately state what the problem is. The problem is if you don't do that, you will be resentful. Oh, what are you talking about? Where does that come from? All right, I thought we were chilling. You don't have your glasses. You're in LA. You're talking about just because, and you did a stream earlier, and now you're talking about resentment. I always got to go dark, man. Basically saying nothing strange here that if you do not take responsibility, you will not be able to give up the resentment because there's always something to blame. So the point is, and before we bring on the first person hopping on here as we go on, the point is this. The first thing that we've talked about, this just because word, phrase, is that it stands for ultimate responsibility and also ultimate power, or at least is an expression of that ultimate will. I willed it to be so. There is no reason why. And to ask, to interrogate all your particular motivations, your goals, your doings, and especially your, let's say, beliefs, to ask until you get to the point where you can just say, because that's how it is, or just because. That's when you're freeing yourself from future resentment because you're taking full responsibility by asking questions until you get to the point of arbitrariness. Okay? And we'll talk a little bit also about the fact that there is a usefulness to doing things just because. So, but as we continue to muse out here in the Los Angeles with the skyline, in the skyline prime time, what am I?
Yes. How you doing, Ike?
I'm doing very well. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm good. I see the view. It looks beautiful down there in LA. The site, the dark scene, dark jack, everything. It looks splendid. Different look.
Well, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much. And how
Um.
this evening, and what do you have for us on this
Well, one
crazy
thing
just
I would
because
have,
topic?
I would like to ask. Since you tinkled with the algorithm, was you the results that you, I guess, expected? Was it fulfilling early this stream?
Mm. When you say tinkle with the algorithm,
Like you try to do something different. Like you come live this, I guess, on your phone to see what type of outcome you're trying to,
yeah.
or what you're trying to receive. Doing that.
Okay,
You say you,
that's
yeah, that's okay.
very good. Do you have YouTube playing in the background there, or
Yeah, let me stop. Let me stop this. Let me mute this because it might. You hear it now?
um, yeah? I still hear
It's good.
myself back there, but I guess well, not anymore. Not anymore. That's good. But can you say something, or can I not hear you now?
No, I mute myself. If it's gone, I have to jump out and jump back in and see if it's correct. Let me do that now.
Okay, cool. So let me address your question, and it is a great question, ladies and gentlemen. So out of whim, because well, induced by lack of sleep, so I didn't sleep last night. Took a 7 a.m. flight this morning. Landed, drove in, checked in, and from that particular mind state, I was like, you know what? I know that makes more sense to do this kind of because I'm not very adept at social media. Okay, generally speaking, but just to go live, just go live and say something, right? Go live because you haven't slept and you're gonna bug some people at 8 a.m. in the morning, right? But let me see Sorry, let me see not Facebook, but YouTube. Let me see what happens with that on YouTube. And as a matter of fact, I learned quite a few things, a lot of which I haven't processed yet. So I guess the results have been satisfactory. And also, that was when I decided to do this particular stream, right? When I just decided to go on that stream, I was like, let me do this stream because certain themes came up in the random conversation. And I was like, you know what? We can talk about this with the heading of just because. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, that answers my question very much. Very good, very good. That's a good answer. Yes, yes. And one other thing, one short thing, I might come back middle of something right now. Uh, I'd like to thank you for coming by doing the show yesterday. But people not familiar, I had Icon, so I'm probably gonna upload it. Gonna have to give me like a few weeks because I had to catch up other backup shows I've done because of the suspension on YouTube months ago. So
Mm-hmm.
I had to time them, put them out timely, occasionally because they're dated. So it's not like some people think it's new. It is new still, but it's dated away where when you look at the description, which most people don't read the description. I wish they do. They know what they're watching, what it is. So I'm just going through category. I might just sneak some of the ones I did in advance and then mix up a little bit, but I'm trying to catch up so everything's up to date. That's the hopefully go by January.
Well, you are welcome, right? And thank you, I would say. And
Mhm.
if you don't mind muting yourself now so I don't hear that.
Yeah. Yeah, you hear it? Okay. So I'll step away and come back. All right. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, and yes, Chaos Rain and I had a very fun conversation yesterday about, again, musings about chaos and order, right? On many different levels. The interdependence, the learning how to use one in order to get the other, so on and so forth. We have another guest. We have another guest as we start this impromptu, incognito, ad hoc. Can you say something to make sure that the audio is coming through here? Hello, guest. Or have I muted thee? Think you have to unmute yourself? All right. I shall continue. So, what else can we learn from this particular phrase just because? We already said that one thing that we can definitely learn is the fact that, and guess you can come back once you figure out the audio, is the fact that if you don't get to the point often, you don't get to the point often where you can find out your just because, where you can find out that rock bottom or that solid base from which you project out into the world. If you don't know where that is, then you're going to be resentful at many things, many reasons, many causes. Everything is really your fault. It was the tribe, the country, the nation, your family, capitalism, science, reasons, times. So we might come back to that, but what else? What else? Well, there is a use it or lose it aspect to just because. You know how they ask people, well, why did you climb Mount Everest? And they're like, well, because it was there, just because. Why go to the moon? Because it's hard, because it was there. That kind of a sentiment, right? That's another kind of a just because. This one is not really about the ultimate responsibility and power aspect. It's more of a verb, more of a doing, more of a we are going to go there because why not, right? This is something, and we're looking at this topic here in order to take certain things and make them habits, in order to tweak our behavior slightly, okay? Firstly, we said oh, maybe we want to be asking ourselves questions until we get to the point of just because. Find where our just because is, where our bottom is, where the bottom, the base, the axiomatic is. First, let me try this again. Can you
Can you
say something now?
can you hear me?
Yes, now I can hear you.
Awesome. How you doing?
I am doing very well. How are you?
Doing great. Doing great. I just came off of I was watching another live and then YouTube showed that you had something going on, so that seemed interesting.
Oh, well, I'm glad you're here. What do you have for us? What are you going to add to the musings that have been said so far, or do you have something else in mind?
So in on the topic, I think when you say just because, what I think about is kind of like the impact that, let's just say RP, like the red pill, the impact that it's had, um, at least even just on myself. When I think about the red pill space, right? Um, Before I found out about this space, I feel like there's a lot of things where in other words, just the understanding that, hey, this is, for example, when we talk, I mean, I know this is not the topic, but let's say when we talk about, female nature, for example, that's kind of like a just because, it's kind of like a, hey, this is how it is. You can either get with the program or you can be upset about it, and until you blue in the face, right? But before that, not having that understanding, and going through, in my case, like, the angry, super angry, resentful rage phase, right? Where you're just kind of upset at the world because, because you were blue pill and you got your heart broken and all those things. And then you kind of like arrive at that just because, where you're just like, okay, because it forced me to take accountability, and to the point where I don't even blame, anybody in my past anymore. Where I feel like I used to do that, right? Like I used to just, blame, say it's her fault, it's this, it's that. But now I'm like, you know what? I should have operated differently. I should have carried myself differently, and it also caused me to like analyze my circumstances better, and just myself. For example, the fact that, like, I even though I had my father in my life, I was mostly raised by my mother, right? And
Hmm.
not really understanding the impact that that had. So, anyways, I guess my contribution to that is when you say just because, that was the first thing that came to mind is kind of like just, I know the conversation's not about red pill, but that's the connection I immediately made. Is how it's had a tremendous impact on me, to the point of really helping me be accountable. Rather than the very angry and resentful and, like,
Hmm.
um, rageful person that I was not too long ago, actually. Whereas now it's just like, okay, this is what it is, and you can either deal with it or you can just be upset all day and be mad at the world, right? Um,
Hmm. 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 Yeah, it is a very apt and I would say solid connection, that you made there because the themes of responsibility that because first of all you talk about nature, right, which is that which occurs of itself. That is one definition of nature. Something is natural if that's just how it is, right? It is what it is just because, right? And nature, or which is in a sense a certain kind of axiom that we have in terms of our living anyways, and also from the standpoint of concepts, axioms, right, places where whether take God for example, one of the big axioms out there, or points where your particular, let's say, ethics originate from, your arguments about the nature of existence and so on and so forth. Finding those axioms, basically, getting to the point where it's arbitrary, asking yourself to the point where you're like, hey, just because is great because it allows you, just as you mentioned, but even in within the microcosm of the RP situation, but that same effect amplifies everywhere. In other words, the effect of responsibility, which it ultimately is about, right? Just because, right? I did it just because I'm taking full responsibility, right? And that gives you power. That gives you a solid, you know where your ground is. So I think that it was a very good thing to bring up. Do you have anything else, sir, before we get to Lion Legal?
I did have another connection, but I don't want to hold up the space if
Oh yeah, you know what? Yeah, go Lion Legal. Go ahead, and
You
then
can stay on
we come
too.
back to you. Yeah,
Yeah,
go
sure.
ahead, stay on.
So I think the phrase "just because" has to be taken with a pinch of salt, essentially, because everybody that is successful had intention behind their action. And if you look at the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Successful People, written by Stephen Covey, he says for a person to be successful, one of the keys to that success is being proactive. So anything that you do in life, in order to get the best out of it, sometimes you have to be intentional. You have to know what the objective is that you're trying to attain.
That is a very good point. It's almost like you're moving into the second area that I was thinking about. And the second area is the area of just because being necessary for growth and being ready for the future. So you said proactive, right? You have to do certain things just because so that you can find out if there are opportunities laying that way. This is not something particularly profound or even interesting that I just said, right? But I think that it should be quite clearly understood that there are certain things that if you don't do, in other words, we have let's say you have low hanging fruit, right? And you pluck out all the low hanging fruit around for whatever reason. Even if you're satisfied, you should want to go out into the and explore, either explore the ocean, explore the star, the galaxies, whatever, or God telling Abraham to get out of his father's tent and go, right? That the actually just doing stuff just because the taking of action, the taking of risk, if you will be another way to say it, or the hero's journey is absolutely a good proactive thing to do because that's how you find out new orchards with new low hanging fruit, whether it be in the mental space in terms of scientific advancements or in the space of technology or whatever it may be, right? Or literally going out and conquering lands or whatever it might be, right? So I 100% kind of well, I know that I was saying things that are in parallel to what you were saying, but yeah, Lion Legal, I concur.
Yes. So I think what I take from what you stated is that experience is the best teacher. So even if a child says, "Okay, I'd like to be a doctor, etc., I'd like to be an architect," until they actually experience what it's like to be in that setting, they will not truly know if they can actually put intention behind that and go for a 4-year course or a 10-year course, because there's an abstract understanding, but once you actually get the experience, that's the point at which you know if this is for me or not, essentially. Also, I'd like to ask you something. If you don't answer the question, that's entirely fine. Did you see an Andrew, what's his name, Schultz show, a comedian, Andrew Schultz? I think he picked out somebody in the audience. Do you recall that show?
Yeah, that thing haunts me wherever I go. Yeah, I was
Oh
there.
dear. Okay. So what's your opinion on what took place in that show? And maybe you'd like to tell the audience what occurred.
Oh, well, ladies and gentlemen, some of you might know Andrew Schultz. Andrew Schultz is a comedian.
I am actually a fan of his.
I'm not, but whatever.
Yeah, okay. I'm a fan of his in the right doses. I was gonna say. It was like for certain reasons. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go to a comedy show. One of the few things that I do, right? But if I'm going to go out somewhere, it'll be to a comedy show. I happened to be in Sacramento. I went to go see Andrew Schultz. I was in the front row. He did a whole roast of me back and forth. It's a viral video. It's got how many million views does it have right now? I don't know, but it
A
happened
lot.
about a year ago. It's got a lot of views. It's called Albino Says the N Word, right? That's the name of the video. So go check it out. Well, what do I think about what happened? So I think that a lot of what I thought about it could be very clearly seen from how I reacted, which is it wasn't good fun. I being someone who also does stuff on stage, you know, I can understand and I enjoy a good crowd interaction, a good vibe spreading, a good maybe little edginess, but then it comes out. My particular sensibilities tend to be able to withstand more edgy stuff than
Mhm.
others. So I'm not expecting everyone. I'm not saying all comedy has to be a little crazy and push your buttons, but I definitely took it in stride. I played his game with him, and I think it all worked out for all parties, right? So it's like, and it's kind of well known that if you're sitting in front row or anywhere close to the front in an Andrew Schultz show, he's gonna say something or do something. Did I think something would? I mean, of course, I knew there was a possibility something was gonna happen. It's not like I don't walk around knowing what's going on. Someone's
Mm.
gonna say something.
Well, yeah, I thought that you handled yourself as you do normally with grace and dignity. I felt that his behavior might have been somewhat inappropriate because he did not know you, so he may not have known how you would react to a lot of his, inappropriate statements. And on top of that, this is not a Chris Rock level, a comedian. This guy is like, basically damn near treading water as far as the jokes are concerned. But what can you do? What can you do? But of course, you took it well. You took it well, but I didn't find it funny at all.
Yeah, I can definitely. Yeah, I completely see that perspective because it didn't have to, it wasn't particularly funny, no, but it was one of
No.
those. Yeah, it was one of those. In the room though, it was interesting. You know why? Yeah, let me. The reason why is because I suspected something like that was gonna happen, right?
Mm,
Plus, um, I do like a little bit of. In other words, the shock of certain reactions, which the camera or the audience or the audio couldn't catch in the
yeah.
room at certain times, was just it was interesting to me. It was exciting to me. It was funny to me. So even beyond the fact that the whole thing wasn't funny, but it was kind of yeah, that's kind of how I was taking it. I was having a good time. But
Yeah.
Lion Legal, hold on one second. What did you have? You had something else to add, young man, before um yeah, go on.
Sure. So I had actually two things that I was thinking, other than what I mentioned earlier. I feel that just because there's two other aspects to it that I think of. For one, there is it helps you. I think and I think you alluded to this earlier. It helps you form better. Like I think it helps you form better. Trying to figure out the best way to articulate this. It helps you debate better. It helps you understand and debate better. And then on the flip side, though, I feel like it can also be used in a negative fashion to um, basically just be ignorant. So, and here's what I mean, right? So, with the first example of understanding better, I think the immediate thing that comes to mind is, so my father's a preacher, right? He's a preacher. He studied theology and all that. And I grew up a Christian. I grew up a Christian. The whole nine, like in the choir, everything. and I'm no longer religious, right? And so my dad and I, we have these very interesting debates all the time, because I have a very different perspective now. And I didn't just wake up and decide I'm not going to be Christian anymore. I actually have legitimate reasons that I think I can, basically I feel like I can validate my position, right? And a lot of times, one of the reasons I find that my debates with my father are very successful compared to literally every other Christian that I ever have debates with is because of that ability to arrive at that understanding that there is going to be a disagreement just because, and in the sense that, for example, there's certain arguments that are rooted in faith, right? They're rooted in faith.
Mhm.
So if I'm coming at it from a purely, let's say, logical, tangible standpoint, then
Mhm.
you can't really, like, there's no connection there. There's a big disconnect that you can't force it to connect, right? Because it's just two fundamentally different positions. But that understanding allows me to say, okay, you know what? He believes this because at the end of the day, this position right here, we've reached a point where it's just about faith. And the fact that I don't have that faith anymore, I can't argue that, right? I can't go against that. But neither and in fact, he can actually understand my position in terms of like the logical perspective. But we can see the difference if that makes sense. And then on the flip side, like I said, with the but kind of helping people be ignorant, I mean, in a lot of cases, I find so many cases where you're having a conversation with somebody, and I think this is one of the things that I love when I hear Kevin Samuels talks about this a lot when he talks about approaching a conversation in good faith. A lot of times, like I'll have a conversation with somebody about something. It might be even a controversial issue or whatnot, and you can kind of see that they haven't thought it through, and so it arrives at a just because, not because we've kind of gone as far as we could into the conversation to get to that point, but because we actually have not approached the conversation with any depth at all, right? Like with any type of depth at all. And like the most recent one of those examples I've had is I was discussing the wage gap with a colleague, right? So I'm an engineer, and I was discussing the wage gap with a colleague, and her position is that is just because like that the wage gap exists, and it's just because of your gender. And I was like, well, I agree that the wage gap exists, but there are a ton of other reasons, right? Like women are more agreeable, men are more aggressive, men negotiate harder. There's all these things, right? And there's generally speaking, the pipeline. There are more men in the engineering pipeline, et cetera, right? But the depth that she applied to this was just your gender allows you to make more money than I do, right? And so for her, she arrived at that just because so quickly, because she didn't apply any type of real good faith analysis to the conversation. I don't know if I'm articulating this properly, but
No, I think 1 second there. So you mentioned two things. The first one has to do with really axioms or assumptions, right? Just because, ask yourself the question till you get to the point of the just because. So since you and your dad, or you and anybody having a reasonable argument, know what the axioms and assumptions are, generally speaking, or maybe we know what the historical context is, very speaking, what are we talking about here from 1914 to 1920? Or are we talking about calculus? Are we talking about algebra? Right? Are we talking about philosophy? That kind of a thing. When there is an understanding of the rules of the game, where someone's playing Go, someone else is playing chess, someone else is playing backgammon or whatever, right? If that's not happening, that's always a more productive conversation. And the way to get there is to get to these axioms, to these bases, so on and so forth. So that was kind of like the first thing that you said, and 100% good way of articulating it, a good way of exemplifying it with the conversations with your dad and so on and so forth. But then there's this other part of the ignorance, right? Which is, you see, at least there is something to be gleaned from that kind of a response. In other words, someone will say just because, and then they may be angry, or they may be sad, or they may be pick anything, or it may be ego, pride, so on and so forth. So, in other words, that's why they're doing it. At least they put their cards on the table. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean that that's where they'll always be. Obviously, people get in states and whatever and choose to be willfully ignorant and so on and so forth. But it could be from this ignorant standpoint, just because, rah, right? And then, okay, so it's because you're angry, right? Or it's because it hurts you in a certain way. That's why you're doing this. But at least you now, both they are putting their cards on the table. They're actually being more responsible, and you also learn where they're coming from, right? Because expecting people to be rational, like we're always we're not rational, right?
I
I don't
agree.
know. Yeah. So, and that includes me. I'm saying that for myself first and foremost, because the thing about noticing fallacies and noticing irrationality and so on is that people always try not to include themselves, or they always forget that, So you're only rational when you're doing rational things, but then most things that we do as social animals out here, valuing of things and so on and so forth, are not rational. So you're kind of out there on the limb with most human activity. But do you have anything to add to that, Lion Legal, before we continue this conversation?
No, there's actually another book that sprung to mind. I forgot the name of the book, but it was written by I think a psychologist called Daniel Kahneman, and it states that most decisions are not rational decisions. They're split-second decisions
Is it the
based on.
think fast and think slow?
Correct, exactly. So they're split-second decisions based on a lot of arbitrary factors, such as what time of the day it is, if a person has had lunch or not, so if they're in an angry mood or they're not. So decision making is actually a very error-prone process as far as human beings are concerned. We don't think through a lot of things. So I guess the topic is actually pretty opposite to the human condition. We are not deep thinkers in every single aspect of life, and we can't be, because there's so much stimuli coming at us every single day. That how do you come to the right outcome every single time? That's why you have things like stereotypes. You have things like people who prejudge a situation and predetermine things which may or may not be true. But the people that get the big decisions right, who you're going to marry, what job you're going to go into, how much effort you put in your career, the people that get those big decisions right, they're the ones that are successful in life.
So I have a question, like for both of you guys on this, based on what Lion Legal, sorry, well, what you just said. I'm curious, do you see a connection? Because I feel like I see a connection between this. Do you see a connection between the ability to think critically about things and be rational, and the thirst, and maybe this is just the way that I'm framing it, but the thirst that a lot of people seem to have to find and follow like some kind of authority leader figure, right? And so, in other words, like I find that a lot of people, that when I have conversations with them, when it seems that they're not thinking critically about something, or when it seems that they're just stating a status quo position without any thought, it feels to me as if like they're only saying this because, for example, this is whatever ideology that they subscribe to states the position is, or whoever their leader is, right? And there's a ton of conversation you can have within that. Whereas like the people that I find are like that I find think more critically are the people that you can't really even put them in a box, right? Like in most cases, at least in my experience, like you can't really put them in a box. You don't really even know like where they stand, because they're just in search of truth rather than a leader or authority figure, et cetera, et cetera. Again, I don't know if I'm articulating this properly. Do you understand the question?
Okay, if I understand the question correctly, you are stating that if a person thinks critically, they're less likely to follow an authoritarian figure than if they don't. Is that correct?
Not necessarily authoritarian, right? So not necessarily authoritarian. I'm just saying, like, for example, like if somebody, like, rather than somebody, for example, may have certain views that align, let's say, with feminism, right? For example, right? Certain views that align with feminism, but they're not a feminist, right? And they, because they have certain other views where they thought critically about it, and they're like, okay, I don't subscribe to this position. Whereas there'll be somebody else who basically, if something is a feminist position, that's their position, and that's it. And there's no thought about it, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, most people that think critically and have that ability are quite, educated. unfortunately, or unfortunately, that is the way it is. A lot of people who are able to analyze deeply have an open trait. So they're open to new ideas, new concepts. And even if they hold a particular view or they come from a particular group, by the time that they have new data that completely opposes their original idea, they will change their view. They're open to doing that. A person who does not have that, does not think critically, is just going to parrot any doctrine that they have already, been able to assimilate over time. So if they say they grew up in a particular way of thinking, a particular church, that is it for them. They don't want to hear anything else.
Agreed.
Let me think. I think I can throw a monkey wrench in this.
And
whole
church is a
thing.
good thing. I mean, I'm a Christian. So the church is a good thing. I just want to add that, but I'm just saying that as an example. Okay.
Yeah. So generally speaking, and if to restate, it's about appealing to tradition, appealing to authority, as opposed to appealing to quote unquote rationality to the degree to which one could grasp it, right? But there is something that I would like to say about the education aspect, which is that if it is okay, first of all, not all education is created equal vis-a-vis this particular thing we're talking about. Okay, critical thinking, the ability to weigh things, compare things accurately, right? To analyze probabilities, maybe, and other statistical data, consume other statistical data, that is, understand that they're always premises, understand. So basically, what I'm saying is this: only certain people are trained to do that. Only certain educated people, like for example, economists, lawyers, and everybody in the hard sciences. Yeah, that's kind of what they, that's kind of the landscape, right? By definition, that's what they do. But also, you have the economists and lawyers, but then you forget that most other quote unquote kinds of education that is out there doesn't necessarily have to hold to any of this stuff that we're saying. I mean, this is well known, right?
Yes, I see your point. I see your point. I mean, somebody may be educated, but they can't. I think a perfect example of this would be some of the people who, again, not to bring Kevin Samuels again, but some of the people who come on his show, right? Like they're educated and whatnot. But once he brings up statistics, and it's like okay, if you are trying to chase this number of people, and there's very few of them, right? And everybody's trying to get them. What's your likelihood of getting that person, right? And that's just math. But but to them, even though they're educated, they seem to not understand it. So I see your point. I see your point.
Well,
Yeah, and then,
Kevin Samuels, to me, I don't think he's adding anything of value, really. I think a lot of people that follow him look for answers which may require a lot more of a professional understanding and help than he can offer, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, to be fair, I didn't want to make this about Kevin Samuels, right? So I don't want to make.
What's your view on Kevin Samuels, Jonathan? What's your view?
My view of Kevin Samuels. Well, I can actually tell you, Kevin Samuels. So I mentioned earlier the red pace. Well, I don't know if Ike wants me to get into this because I don't want to derail the conversation. I'll be quick if you want me to answer this because I can answer it.
Go ahead.
Okay, so my view of Kevin Samuels is actually pretty straightforward. So, like I said, for me, I joined the red pill space, or I not joined, but I discovered the red pill space after I had my heart broken, or let me not say I had my heart broken. I went through a breakup, and I was engaged to the person I was gonna get married, etc. So it was pretty big for me. And at the time, again, like my behaviors as a man, I think they definitely don't reflect the way I am now. So long story short, discovered the red pill space. And I feel like at first, it kind of had a negative effect on me, right? Because it really made me very rageful and angry and all that. And I actually find Kevin Samuels to be a breath of fresh air. And the reason I say this, there's multiple points to this. So the first point is that he's the only person other than
hold on.
Yes.
The sentiments on both sides have been expressed, and I know that you're about to go into the aspects, but the aspects will further open up derail the conversation into.
That's a good point.
So it's like, okay, this sentiment over here has been expressed, and then the other sentiment has been expressed. But we don't want to get into a debate in accounting.
And that's what I was trying to avoid in the first place. So, anyways, yeah.
Let's get into or back into the whole education piece, okay? And I'm going to push it one step further with the education thing, okay? Beyond the fact that, because Lion Legal brought up the fact that the people who can think this way are educated. But then I pointed out that number one, it's only a certain kind of training that tends to emphasize that kind of stuff. You can
I would agree.
you can be sure that an economist, okay, and again, I'm not trying to insult anybody. We're talking about numbers. We're talking about the average, right? So the average economist is more likely to be more clear-headed in his thinking vis-a-vis comparisons, projections, statistics, so on and so forth, than the average sociologist, right? That's just kind of how it is. You'd expect lawyers to be able to kind of think in a certain way because, that's kind of what they do. So that is number one thing. But I say that, let me add the challenge that these people are self-selecting, okay? In other words, it's not a question of even the training, okay? That these people are who they are, and then they go into it. A certain person is going to go study engineering, and a certain person is going to go be a lawyer, right? In a society where people are not being forced to do that en masse, right? And there's not a lot of randomness vis-a-vis that kind of a choice. So there are psychological types, and I would say there is to put a dark spot on it, because there's all this kind of rationality stuff. One of the dark spots that's on it is these people are more individualistic, almost by definition. What you said, right? They're not quick to join a group, right? I'm speaking as one. I'm like at the head of the march, marching along with those egotistical, individualistic bastards. Yes, because you kind of independence of thought is super important to you. So it's your tend to be at least seen from the outside as more kind of self-absorbed, right? And then these kinds of people also tend to be libertarians. And the only reason I mention libertarians is because of this. You cannot lead. They're not. They're neither good leaders nor good followers. And that's how you never get a huge group of libertarians, like people who are very kind of rational and follow and go where the conclusions take them. They're going to land in too many different spots, right? Just as you alluded to, right? That it's hard to put them in a box. So you can't put them in a box, can't lead them, can't really follow them, they're blah blah blah. So they're a little bit scattered, but I believe it is a psychological type. I don't know if either one of you have a comment on that.
Well, I think that one could say that for a person to get into an artistic endeavor or like vocation, they would have to be that way inclined. Even as far as the brain scans of people are going to accounting, etc., or others are going to law, you look at it and people that are going to law are much more interested in English language, things of that sort, literature. People that are going to maths like to engage the maths side of their brain. But I also feel that the people who get to the stage where they can be successful in critical thinking, things of that sort, environment probably plays the key factor there, because of the fact the education system is so expensive that for them to even get into school, they would likely have to have a family that supports them, have to be surrounded by the right community, etc. There's an example of a guy who has a IQ of I think 180, or in some reports it was 200 apparently. His name is Chris Langan. He was a person that spent some time in college. He actually dropped out and became a doorman. Yet he has one of the highest IQs in the world, right? So somebody who is smart enough to compete with the brightest minds in Harvard, Yale, all of the Ivy League schools, why is he a doorman? Environment. Because of the fact he grew up in a poor family that could not, really push him into education, could not keep him there, etc. So a lot of advances in, I think, the field of education are due to the environment that these students come from.
We have
Well,
a new man in the parlor in the stream. Can you go ahead and say something? I'm assuming.
hello. It's Kaizo, the ninja.
Kaiser the Ninja. He's a PhD.
Yeah.
The PhD.
Yeah. So actually, this is an interesting conversation. So the brother said something about the education thing and environment. I mean, IQ is not related to how someone's choices. That's wisdom. So wisdom is what will allow someone to decide the right path for themselves. Someone can have high IQ,
How
but
do you know
decide
that?
to.
How do you
Right.
know that?
Because IQ, all it does is like a processing power for a computer. All it does is determine the ability to understand simple concepts very fast. Wisdom is the ability to choose. It's like a computer. A
Okay.
computer can't.
Let me ask
a
you
computer-
this.
Right.
Let me ask you this. Okay. Let's say we are going to look at the prison, a population.
Mhm.
Would you agree that a lot of these people had to make conscious choices to get where they got to?
Yeah.
Yes or no? Okay. Would you also agree that by and large, they may not be, the IQ may not be, the same as, for example, the IQ in a room of PhDs at like a high Ivy League school?
Well, of course,
University.
but we can't compare prisoners with the highest IQ average population.
Okay.
But I would also
Okay.
I would also say that depends, right? So for example, you could be a high IQ serial killer, right? And you'll end up in prison, right?
No. Not like anomaly. Anybody can
Right, just
bring
generally.
an
Yeah.
exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Exactly. Anybody can
I-
bring an exception to the rule. That is not a statistically significant,
No, you're right.
number. Yeah. Yeah.
No,
So
but I don't
like,
think.
I think that.
Sorry,
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't
Go
think
ahead.
you can compare PhDs with which are outliers of all societies with the people in prison, because they're outliers in actually getting caught. For example, like there's a study on pedophiles, right? They found that the pedophiles in prison had an extremely low IQ. However, this was just representative of the people that got caught. The smart ones don't get caught because they have all sorts of. I'm not going to go into it, but they have ways to protect themselves on the interweb. So you already have a skewed statistical data set that has that kind of profile. Same thing with criminals. The rich white collar criminals don't get caught because the kinds of jobs the kinds of crime that they commit, they tend to do it better, and then they tend to have safety nets in order to not get caught. So already in prison, you're having the lower end of the spectrum of the criminals. Many criminals are actually decently IQ'd, but the ones in prison, you're going to get a skewed, slightly lower profile on the average scale. So
Okay.
that's
Yeah. Well, I can't really assess, unless a study is done. But the studies that I have seen have shown that, first of all, the people who end up in jail, a lot of them are actually good people. I think that the prison system in the US is completely skewed because most people are there for drug offenses and non, like the violent crimes, etc. Exactly. But if they had gotten education, if they had gotten the right upbringing, they would not be there. So it's actually a bad reflection on the way that society is. Plus, my other point is that anytime we have to think about what we'd like to do, if we have to move to another state for a job, if we have to pursue a particular career, etc. Anytime you have to think about important things going on in your life, you have to use your intelligence to figure out if you're making a good decision or not. That intelligence is quantified by IQ. So IQ tells you what level of intelligence you have. And the fact of the matter is that in order for you to actually compute, do I do this, do I do that, your IQ plays a role in the way that you're able to come out with a particular outcome as far as the decision-making process.
I'll have to link the studies on this chat showing that actually it's not correct. Wisdom is different from IQ, and you tend to see, for example, followers, people who follow leaders, people who listen to Kevin Samuels, for example, and follow his advice. The ones who actually listen to
I
him
agree
don't
with
tend
you
to
there.
be high
Trust
IQ.
me.
Right.
Right there,
So
I agree with you on that point. But please continue.
right. So what you're saying is, obviously, if you have high wisdom and have high IQ, you're going to make the best decision. Hence, you get the most successful rich people like Bill Gates, etc. They have high IQ and high wisdom, so they can get the best out of the whole situation. And in terms of the criminal enterprise system, yeah, you're right. Of course, depending on how the system is structured, you're going to get people who are in prison for certain things. But it's because it's an exclusive hierarchy that we exist in. There's only a certain number of jobs available that pay a certain amount. So these people have literally no choice, in the sense of the word. Obviously they do, but then to commit the kind of sins that they do in order to get as far as they end up having, because there's only a certain number of pies in the system. And also there is a reward system, which is actually quite an important point that you guys were talking about. So a lot of these criminals, like in drug dealing or etc., there's a hierarchy whereby these people are seen as the top of their game. So they get praised by their friends, or I guess their colleagues, their enemies, and also women. So there is an actual reward system in being a criminal, as opposed to working in a low-paid job serving customers in McDonald's. So that actually has a quite big chapter to play in. There has to be some kind of reward that makes these people want to do that crime. And that's another part, which is it's environmental, of course, but I was going to go deeper and think that actually a lot of the reasons why you get some people who are much more independent thinkers is because the reward systems that they have within their own mind, the psychology, is actually on the basis of self-knowledge, self-learning, and discovering and discerning the truth for themselves. So as opposed to majority of people who get it from the community. So depending on the community, this is why, for example, majority of people in poor neighborhoods not majority, a large minority of people in poor neighborhoods end up in prison, because those are the kinds of people that follow the cultural aspects of the society that they're ingrained upon. Meanwhile, there's some small minority of people in these bad neighborhoods who don't end up in prison and end up being successful, because those were already the self-driven individuals who could derive their own sense of worth and psychological well-being from their own selves, from their own preferences. These people don't care whether they're at the top of their hierarchy, because they can perceive time further and actually think, okay, I can be a doctor. Right now, I might be seen as the uncool kid who's trying to act white, but in the future, I'm going to own my own clinic.
So I have something I really want to add to this, actually. So I think the way that is it Kaizo?
Kaiser, yeah.
So I think the way that Kaizo represented this, I think it was brilliant, because I agree with you 100%. I look at it actually the same way. I think wisdom is essentially the algorithm, right? Like think about it from a software perspective. Wisdom is the algorithm. IQ is like the CPU power, right?
Right.
And I think the last example you took, I 100% relate to that. So I grew up in the hood, and in fact, I've always said this. Like, there are people I knew growing up who were drug dealers who were actually making a shit ton of money, right? They were making a lot of money, and part of the reason, and they're the ones who, eventually they all get caught, but there are drug dealers who have been so smart at what they do. They make a lot of money. They're able to maintain their hierarchy within the neighborhood. And you could tell this person is highly intelligent, right? And so if they only took that skill set, if they took that and applied it to, let's say, business, to something else, I feel like they could be very successful. Now, obviously, it would depend on the domain. But my point is that I think environment has something to do with it, for sure.
That's my point.
So I think environment has something to do with it, for sure. But for me, for example, I am the example of somebody who I've had to deal with, for example, certain, not everyone, but certain people, for example, certain women or certain girls growing up, not messing with me because I was more nerdy in a lot of ways, right? And all that stuff. And it's funny because there are guys that were more of like the bad boys in the neighborhood, and they would actually laugh. They'd be like, yo, Jonathan's gonna be the successful one. Jonathan's gonna, because they could see it, but even the girls would want to mess with them, right?
Right.
So like it's very interesting hearing that perspective, because I don't think that environment necessarily dictates that you have to, which I don't think that's what Lion Legal was saying, but
Yeah.
I feel like it plays a part, certainly, but I wouldn't say because environment, I guess is what I'm saying. I wouldn't say,
I think
And so what do you do now, Jonathan? What do you do?
professionally,
Yes.
I'm a software engineer.
Okay. So you are saying that environment may not play a part. Are you counting just
No, I
yourself,
didn't
or are
say
you?
environment may not play a part. I said environment does play a part. I said it does play a part, but it's a matter of what are you doing? Because obviously, being in that environment, right? Like I'm not near.
Okay.
I'm not around other software engineers. I'm not around other people who are interested in things I'm interested in. I'm not around other people who are like great at math, who love math, who are like, these are the things that personally I love math, right? And so
Would you say that you are the
that means you have to work hard.
exception to?
That means you have to work
Would
hard.
you say?
Would you say?
Yeah. So could you say
Would
that
you say you're
are
the exception to the
exception to
rule?
the rule?
Depends on what you mean by that. I mean,
Right.
How many people are there like you?
Sure.
In
Okay.
the same position.
Sure. To your point,
Okay.
right? Like, if we're gonna be,
Okay. That's my point.
No. You got, hold up. Hear me out. So yes, there to a certain extent, it depends on what you mean, though, right? Because for example, I don't know any other software engineers who came from where I came from, right? But I know other people who have been successful in other things. I know other people who become doctors. I know other people that I grew up with who are actual like physicians now, or who are on their way, who are doing residency, or like. My point is, yes, and I'm sure they're the minority, or maybe I don't know what the percentage is exactly, but
Okay. Yeah.
So I hear your point, but there's also, I think I see enough of them doing making it out that I would say that I wouldn't say it's the exception to the rule. I would say it's not, definitely not the majority, but I wouldn't say it's the exception, right? Because when we talk about exception, we're talking about like a very low minority. I think it's certainly possible for you to come from a certain environment, and especially if you are smart or you have high IQ. I have issues.
Okay, but there are other, there are kids who are living like middle income families, etc., that may not be very bright, but are ensured that they'll get a good job and they'll be able to provide for a family and have a stable income. Correct. Let's say even 80% of the kids in that environment, right? Would you agree with that?
Statistics. Yeah.
Okay. So like people from or kids from the lower income background, it could be the opposite. It might be 20%, 10 to 20% of people in that environment that may be able to get out and get a reasonable income too. So the issue is that, like society should be able to push all of them that have that potential come from a low income background to ensure that they're able to get the same opportunities that everybody else gets, not just 10%, not just 20%.
Is that realistic though, right? Because how would society know?
Of course it is. Of course it is, because there are groups of people who emigrated to America in the 1940s and the 1920s that did not have the same level of income in their groups that they do now. Did not have the same, did not own property.
Sure, but that's beside the point I'm making. What I'm saying is, you didn't finish hearing my question. I'm saying, is that realistic given that, like, if, for example, I'm the kid, for example, that, I started coding during the MySpace days. This is just an example. I started coding during the MySpace days, making MySpace layouts, right? That's how I started writing code. And, everybody thought what I was doing was lame, right? Everybody just like, this guy's like, the kids just thought I sat at the computer and just, I'm messing with layouts, right? Like, who's going to spot what I'm doing and say, okay, let's try to make sure that this guy has a better opportunity to reach his goals than this is what I mean. Like, practically speaking, how do you actually apply your concept? Like, practically speaking, how do you actually that?
The issue is that the way that you're asking it is as if there's a kid with a talent and then somebody comes along or an institution comes along, identifies that kid and pulls that kid out. I am saying that should not be an anomaly. That should not just be a unexpected thing to have a kid with an interest in engineering, a kid with an interest in IT. It should just be so normal that people don't even ask the question, how are they able to identify talent?
But that's idealistic.
They should be able.
That's
no, it's not. It's not because if you have an economy, right, where the Black American economy is 1 point something trillion every single year. So basically, as a country, that would be one of the top 6 or like, 7 countries in the world as far as GDP is concerned. So the money is there. The money is definitely there. The issue is the infrastructure. Having infrastructure such as banks, hospitals, this, that, education infrastructure linked into that, and then also a culture where there is not this constant campaign of seeing NBA players, NFL players, where kids are told instead you can become a doctor, you can become a professional, you can invest in property. Yeah.
That one might be a little bit more like the equalization of opportunities might be possible. That one could be done by how taxes are, put through. So instead of having taxes put through depending on the code, the area code, obviously some area codes like Malibu has a lot more money going through. It could be divided. Fair enough. So that can be done, but the issue remains the even if you do equalize the so-called resources, the interest and the constant interest at home, that can't really be easily solved because that comes down to the parenting. Do they have?
Let me just at that particular point there. I think it should perhaps be clarified how much inequality we're trying to eradicate, or how much equality we're trying to institute. Because you just mentioned, okay, well, this will help, but there's another layer. So how much inequality are we willing to accept? Is that a good place to start?
So actually, real quick, so I actually watched, I forgot whose show you were on, and you actually touched on this, and I thought it was pretty brilliant, actually. You were talking about hierarchy, and specifically, you were like, you put all your cards on the table, and essentially what you said is, you don't particularly believe in inequality, and the whole concept of, like everything should be equal and fairness, and I think you articulated this much better. And I feel like you actually got me thinking a lot when you said that, when I listened to your perspective on this, in terms of just accepting that there are certain things that are going to be the way that they are, in terms of just the hierarchy of things, and like, do we really want, is it even possible for us to have a society where
for the interest of those listening, let me just kind of restate that the point is to notice the trade-offs between freedom, equality, and nature, that these tend to be values that we say are worthy of pursuit. They help us define ends that we pursue politically, socially, and on, right? But they are not, you cannot balance them, right? If you have freedom, freedom is the freedom to be unequal in certain regards, right? And nature knows no equality. Nature does not even like equality. Nature likes high potential and low potential, high ground, low ground, high charge, low charge, so that things can happen, right? But the question still is, to put it back on the table, is there a way of even assessing, okay, even talking about categories of inequality that we can say, okay, we'll leave that alone, but because we're not talking about trying to just go into every corner and cancel everyone who is not equal to the other.
See, I don't think we even.
No, I agree with you. I completely understand what you're saying, in that even if you've got the chance for equality, there might be inequality due to the fact that people spend more time building up their business. People spend more time being successful in their careers. So therefore, they should be entitled to their get off. Every American will definitely believe that, because it's a capitalist, like society. So it makes sense. And I agree with the fact that if you spend the time building up yourself to be successful, you should be entitled to that success. Because if you look at any other state that has done the opposite, communism does not work at all. Every state that has a communist bent to it is essentially a failed state, bar one, but that state is not really communist, So I do agree with that. However, the problem is that if you've got so much inequality that you have a young black kid that can't even go out and not fear being harassed by the police, or even worse, obviously that is a serious issue. If you have people with the requisite intellect, they've got the ability, they can compete with every other kid academically, but yet they don't have the chance to obtain that success. And in fact, the issue with not being able to progress academically is not simply that you can't go to school, you don't get a degree, and you don't feel smart. That affects where you live, affects who you marry, what your life is going to look like, what income you have, what property you own. It affects every aspect of your life. If you don't have a good job, life is very tough. Life is incredibly.
So real quick, I just wanted to say something real quick. I find that one of the things that you said passively, line legal, I find that every time somebody says this, I just find it to be a bit intellectually dishonest. I'm saying this respectfully. I'm not a communist or anything, but when people talk about communism has never worked, I find it a very intellectually dishonest position. I just wanted to put that out.
It
hasn't been tried yet argument or what?
Jonathan.
Yes.
Jonathan.
Sure.
Where has it worked?
So I find it to be an intellectually dishonest position.
Why? No. Right.
Hold up. You have to hear me out. You don't get to dictate how I respond to this. So just listen to my response.
I'm not dictating, but I'm just listening to you. I'm not being rude.
Okay, so when people state that it hasn't worked anywhere, I think it depends. I think it depends. Okay, can you just hear me out?
Are you communist?
So I think it depends on. How you're considering that, and then in comparison to what, right? In comparison to what, and what is working, right? Because for example, so hold on, right? So hold on. So basically, I'll give you an example, right? I've been to Cuba, right? And if I just listened. Again, I'm making it clear I'm not a communist, right? But I think if we're gonna bring this up, right, I think we have to at least be fair about the position, right? I've been to Cuba, and in a lot of cases, when Americans describe a place like Cuba and Fidel Castro and stuff like that, they'll talk about it as a failure. But when you actually go to Cuba and you see, at a minimum, for example, even yes, they may be at a disadvantage in terms of how much funds they have access to, etc. But most they have free education from K to 12, right? They're highly educated, high literacy rate. They at least have a right to all their bare necessities, etc., etc. So my point is, I'm not saying that we should institutionalize communism in America or anything like that. My point is, if we're gonna make if we're gonna take that position, right? Are we saying that has capitalism worked? Because I can't go a block without seeing
I'm gonna use the power of moderator here to just similar to last time, right? So it seems to me that along the way you mentioned things such as what does work mean, for example, which is just a question of, okay, well, what's the game, right? We talked about axioms before, right? We talked about it being important that one person is not playing chess, the other person is playing checkers, right? Yeah. So if you want to define parameters and say which particular system is better at hitting which particular goal, you can play that game for quite a while because there are many ways of defining these parameters and then measuring and in what year, in what decade, under which particular regime. You get what I'm saying? So that can go on and on forever. But I agree with your sentiment, though, that yes, well, if you want to bring up stuff like that, you should narrowly define it. But let me coax us back to the topic here. And I want to ask Kaiser this, okay? Because
even if I jump in, because I have to respond because this guy just said something, something to me. I really want to jump in. I really want to. Okay, Jonathan.
Okay, you got 2 minutes.
Thank you, Jonathan. Do you agree that a democratic society is the best kind of society to live in, or do you think that it's good for you to live under a dictatorship? Yes or no question, please.
I think it's good to live under a dictatorship.
Yes.
I'm not sure anybody would ever say yes to that.
Okay. You do understand Cuba is a dictatorship. You do understand that the leader of Cuba can do anything that he wants to anybody in that country. Do you understand that?
That's your, again, this is where the argument will derail, right? Because that's your position.
No.
That's your position.
No.
That's your position.
No, it's not my position. It's history. You look at history because I've
But here's the
studied
thing, though, when I went to
history.
Cuba, but here's the thing though, when I went to actual Cuba, I was on the ground and I spoke to actual Cubans. They
You're a
laughed.
tourist. You don't
No,
live there. Do you live there?
Listen,
Do you
Okay.
live there?
yeah,
Okay.
but again, you're not
Ryan
letting me
and Jason.
Don't
hold
tell me
on.
that you talk to
L
people. If you
and
didn't
J.
live there, you
Hold
you
on,
don't
hold
know what
on,
it's like
hold
to live
on,
in a
hold
place
on,
like
hold
Cuba.
on, hold on, hold on, hold on, hold on. Okay, can you guys hear me or not?
Yeah.
Yes, I hear you. Again, my only thing here is I'm just trying to be
No, hold
intellectual.
on, hold on.
You just like to avoid the question. The
Look,
issue is that if you
Lion,
live
hold
in a
on as
dictatorship,
well. Hold on,
okay,
right?
okay.
You don't win an
And
argument by talking.
hold on, you too. Right, so we're gonna hold on so that I can just simply restate that if you want to go down the tit for tat and period for period, look, like we can listen to Noam Chomsky debate Bill Buckley all day about, but that's not particularly, I would say, either interesting or, more importantly, to the topic, right?
Agreed.
So, having said that, one of the last things I asked was this. I said that what level of inequality are we willing to tolerate? And if we just use a simple rubric, because one tends to then say, well, why can't we just have all the inequality that we can have? And it's well, you're giving up at least two other things, which is the freedom and then the natural aspect of things, right? You can make a perfectly equal situation, but even if you can imagine it, you will immediately see, this is very unnatural and very unfree, right? So question is, how much of that? And then Lion Legal started to say things such as coming out of your door, not worrying about the cops shooting you, something like that, right? That, okay, well, we can kind of admit that, okay, well, there is, we want that level of equality of opportunity. Call it the opportunity to walk out your door without getting shot. Seems like a fair
I have a question.
opportunity to spread out. So yeah, go ahead, ask that.
Right. So is that really the opportunity to not get shot or to not fear to get shot? Because I think if we really compare the stats, we would then realize that even breaks down. It's more of the fear that of you getting shot rather
just
than...
before I explain what I meant, because I was the one that said that, I think the best way to resolve the argument between John and I is for the audience to click 1 if you agree that you'd rather live in America than Cuba, or click 2 if you agree with John and say that you would rather live in Cuba.
But see,
then we'll see who is right.
Honestly, I never said I'd rather live in Cuba. I never said that. I love living in America. I never said,
You're
making. That's what I'm saying. You're not.
All right. You guys are not going to do this again. So, Mr. Kaiser,
we move on. He doesn't want to move on, but I think it's better because he's not being honest.
I want to move on, but you're being so emotional that, like, it's a bit strange to me. Why can't you have an argument like a reasonable person? Why can't there be parliamentary process? Why do you have to be so emotional? Why are you emotional?
Right, sir? So, Mr. Kaiser, you brought up the aspect of, is it about fear? What I was really going to also then ask is, now that we've kind of seen one particular domain that we're trying to eradicate the inequality from, right? We're trying to see one particular domain, which is like, okay, well, not the fear, the whatever. Sounds like a cultural aspect, okay? What if I were to say that, Mr. Kaiser, and I would leave that to you to say, okay, elaborate upon that, and then let's see if anyone has some pushback to you that says, okay, well, if we're trying to eradicate a certain kind of inequality that has to do with not fearing coming out of your door, okay, then where does one start in order to impart that change, or even what is the landscape, what are the parameters, so on and so forth? So go right ahead.
Right. So this is an interesting one. Okay. So I'll use grape juice, and for grape juice, we mean people stealing your consent. Okay. I won't say the actual word. So some people, some particular gender prefers to be able to walk outside late at night and not fear having grape juice taken from them. Okay, so this is it's a real concern. I mean, it happens sometimes to people, and it shouldn't happen in the sense that we value the ability for us to have freedom yet still be able to be safe. The issue here is the considerations for us to actually have a fully safe society means that we are going to be operating within the realm of losing freedom. For example, a simple solution is having a microchip on everyone's hand, part of that society. Microchip has a GPS tracking device on it, and anyone who is obviously doing anything wrong, the government or whatever big brother can see, and most smart people or sane people won't be doing bad things. Only a few crazy people would, and even then those so-called crazy people would be eradicated slowly from mainstream society. Therefore, we would have zero so-called crime rate, more or less 0.00001%. Now, this is a very reasonable way to a truly safe society where almost nothing bad ever happens. The issue there obviously is we've eradicated freedom for the most part, because obviously we know behavior changes when we are acknowledging that there's a big brother state watching us. We won't even be able to act in what we would want to act and consider free. Now, in terms of the other question about kind of where do we then say, okay, we've got enough free of what we are seeking. This is an ever-ending cascade. So it's like an equilibrium-based equation. You have acid, and then you have the base. The issue here is it will never ever be satisfied, because the moment you quench it, the equilibrium will shift back to the other side. And then even the moment, I'll give you a perfect example. When I came from Africa, I was a great student here, and my grades were the top of the class. However, I got re-equilibrized within a few years to kind of the average person here, meaning everyone gets used to the good, to the point whereby now they have to find a new enemy to fight. So there will never be a situation where we say we have enough of anything. We're always going to be fighting that constant battle of tug and pull. And the other issue is the lagging, the latency. So for example, right now, you have these two contradicting arguments that are in tandem to each other. Women under 35 make more money than men. Women apparently are also earning less than men. So you see the two contradictory arguments act and are made by the same people, that there's gender discrimination and women make less money, and also apparently women now make more money and struggle to find men. Both these arguments happen at the same time by the same people. The issue here is latency. It is the ability to accept that you actually have gotten what you even say that you're seeking, without going into nuances of what you say that you're seeking. And until there's actually a generation that can actually accept facts as they are in real time, this is part of the problem.
Okay, so hold on, Kaiser. That's very good, because you went ahead and you broadened the landscape of all the difficulties associated with this question of equality. Because one thing about it is, whether you're talking about, pick any kind of society, right? Because whatever current context, people tend to point to, okay, let's say capitalism, communism, whatever ism, socialism, Nazism, and then talk about, well, how, are they equal? Who was more equal? Who's less equal? And never realizing that there's never, not just in the current context, in the contemporary context, but there has never, ever been an equal society.
No.
In any system that you could, whatever, pick anything. So
it's all a matter of trade-offs.
Yeah, because it's a way of obviously just saying, look around nature. Why are we acting like, oh, this particular one area here called human society, things are going to all of a sudden change, and then equality is going to reign supreme. But you've said all the other things that make it difficult. But I asked about culture, right? I said, isn't there a cultural aspect to the problem of I got to come out and not worry about somebody shooting me?
Yes, there is. But the cultural aspect is also defined by the environment that has been created over time. For example, prior to the 1980s, there was no crack epidemic. So there was no mass incarceration. After that, with mass incarceration, you also create an environment with young children whereby kids grow up and they don't get the right instruction from their home environment. There's a lot of poverty there as well, especially we take a breadwinner out of the household and you put kids back into poverty. So I think that there have been a lot of factors that add to insecurity in a lot of these essentially in lower income areas.
Okay, so if we were to I'm sorry, was that you, Kaiser, or was that
No,
Jason?
sorry, ask your question.
However, the alternative is simply to have a communist state like Cuba, and I'm sure everything would be great if we did that.
Kaiser, what were you going to ask?
Oh, no, sorry. I was waiting for you to finish, and then I was going to ask a question.
Okay, so my point is, because I still keep going back to the culture thing. Why? Because what tends to happen a lot is people say yes and then they move on. But if I'm saying, okay, yes, it is one of the items in this dish that we need to prepare, but I want to focus on that item right now.
Okay, so I actually think culture has a bigger component to play than even the other external factors. For example, Lion mentioned that we could, through a tax system, for example, equalize the so-called opportunities to these kids, at least from external factors. The issue here is the internal culture derived within each home and as well within each racial group is vastly different. Like I mentioned before with the Indians in the UK at least, and then same thing with America and the Nigerians, etc. These are unique cultures that, and at least with the Indians, it's not just an immigrant thing, because it's also like third, fourth generation Indians who are still successful, at least twice as successful as the white counterparts or all the other people. Meaning that they've ingrained such a strong culture of focusing on certain kind of components within society and operating within certain hierarchies. Meanwhile, certain other groups, I won't mention them, their culture is more ingrained within more criminal aspects of society and trying to, well, I guess, operate within that kind of realm. This is despite the so-called resources availability. And the evidence I'll give is that school called Michaela Academy, whereby this school is in London, in one of the poorest boroughs, where the kids were kids generally in that borough score in the bottom 5% of all kids in their high school graduations. However, this woman decided to make a school with discipline, instilling, with kids, areas where kids are, single parent households, etc. And they scored top 5% of the country. This is despite anything else. That she didn't have any extra resources. She just basically changed the culture of the school environment and the teaching, and she succeeded.
I would like for that to be true. In other words, I'm not saying it's not, but I'm just saying that I do have a bias, right? I have a bias that says, oh, that would be great if that's true, because it's just one of those things that I've always been, in terms of discipline, right?
Right.
Number one, because it also makes it easy. Because when you talk about culture, it was like, oh my God, what do we mean? But if you just take it down to discipline, then I'm like, oh yeah, that's easy. And discipline is kind of one of my things, right? Not that I'm a disciplined person, but I just find that it is important to impose and induce discipline on people. Now, Jason, you still there, sir?
You mean Jonathan?
Sorry,
He went to Cuba. He booked the ticket.
Lion Legal, you're gonna need to stop that, or I'll have to drop you off the panel.
All right.
So, Jason, I'm sorry, Jonathan. My bad. You are in these particular environments that Mr. The PhD was talking about earlier, right? And saying, well, there's this entrenched, cultural, okay. And I would like for those kinds of things to also be true, right? But being someone with an inquisitive mind, we got to be scientific about things and so on and so forth. Not that we're collecting data here or anything, but amongst the cohort of people who made it out of that neighborhood that you described, Jonathan, right? Because you said other people who did other things, right? None of them were engineers, but some people did other things. What are the commonalities would you say, and what do they think? What do you guys think about the culture, right? Are there commonalities between these people? And then what do you guys think about the culture aspect of this whole conversation?
Oh yes, I think this is like I think it's actually very loaded in a lot of ways. But I think there's some strong points I can make. So for one, I think one of the things that's at least from my perspective can be a hindrance, at least culturally, is the idea that the people who quote unquote make it out, right? Because at the end of the day, like when you grow up in the hood, there's this idea that you just you can't wait to leave the hood, right? You can't wait to just not be in this situation. And so there's this idea, though, at the same time that everybody wants to leave the hood. If you do leave the hood and you actually leave it for good, then and you don't want to come back, let's say because you want your life to be in a better position, et cetera, then there's this perspective that you're a sellout, for example, right? There's this perspective that you're a sellout. And in a lot of cases, somebody who leaves the hood, I'm not saying this scientifically, right? Because I don't know what the stats are on this, but in a lot of cases that I've observed, when people who actually leave the hood and get into better positions in their lives, they tend to become more individualists, right? They tend to become more, whether it's conservative or libertarian, et cetera, et cetera. And so, again, that amplifies this idea that you're a sellout even more, right? Because it's like,
okay, since you knew these people, okay, because I'm going to just test out that simple thing here about self-selection, right? Since you knew these people, is it the case that you could say, oh, this guy turned out to be more, individualist, more libertarian type, or where you'd be like, oh yeah, it makes sense. This guy was always that guy, anyways, right? What is the balance there?
Ike, I do have to go now, but I'd like to say good night to all. Good night, Ike, Kaizo, and I will chat with you later.
Okay, see ya.
Shout out to Lion Legal. Be out.
Thank you.
Thank
you. Take care. Bye.
Ticket to Cuba. Anyways.
Have a flight, nice flight.
Have a nice flight. Anyways, so I'm sorry. What was I saying?
I got your question. So the question was essentially, were they always this way, or did they become this way? Essentially, and I think that's actually a good question. I didn't think of it like that. To be honest, I feel like it's hard to. I feel like I'd probably have to think about this a little bit more. But you might be actually right. You might actually be right now that I think of it. You might be right that they've always been this way. Although I feel like there's a component of you having to kind of hide that, right? Like if you're there's a component of you having to, basically be for the collective, right? Like be for the community. And so maybe they've always been that way and they've just hidden it. Again, I haven't, I'm just going off the top right here. So maybe if I think about this a little bit harder and think of very specific people, I feel like you're probably right about this. If that's what you're essentially alluding to is there's probably a factor of this that's just them already being that way. I know for myself, to be quite honest, I've actually, for me, it's actually been an interesting progression for me personally, right? Because just a couple years ago, I was a heavy, what people call online social justice warrior, right? Just as a couple years ago, right? So I think a lot of my views and perspectives and whatnot have shifted. But I think a big part of that is one of the things that you said earlier is to just, my position on most things is I have strong opinions, but I hold on to them loosely, right? So if somebody comes to me with a better argument and I think about it and it makes sense to me, and it makes sense to me, then for me, I'm open to seeing more into that. So that kind of mindset for me has helped me change a lot of my positions. So I'm definitely, I would say I'm definitely not a social justice warrior anymore, but so I definitely wasn't the individualist. I guess is my point, right? At least personally, I wasn't the individualist. Because I didn't have that mindset. I don't know if I would call myself an individualist now, but I think I'm more so that now than I've ever was before. Because a big part of that progression for me has been, for example, and I guess I'm saying this on live, like I've never talked about these positions. But one of the things I've noticed, for example, is that to the question about equality earlier, do people even want equality? Like, do people even can I take a quick example actually to solidify this? Because I think there's a quick example I could take. So, one of the things, like when you talk about so one of the things with social justice warriors, right, is that you believe that everything, everyone should, have everything should be equal, and there's a certain group that's being oppressed more than others, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's some truth to every aspect of those things, but I think a lot of times what the analysis that's not done is what are you actually doing about your situation, right? And I think for me, that's one of the things that I've come to. That's one of the things that helped me get my mindset out of that, like where it was before. Is I started really analyzing my own circle of friends, my own circle of fellow social justice warriors, and I was already in a better position than they were, right? Like I've been a software engineer for a while now, and so I would analyze them, and in some cases they would be struggling, for example, financially, and I'll try to help them. But then I would give them, I have a friend of mine, for example, she was struggling, right? This is just a real example. She was struggling, and I was helping her out financially, right? And then I had another friend of mine who owns a business and had a role, a position, and because of me and my recommendation, was willing to hire my friend who was struggling, and she didn't take the job, and that puzzled me. It was just like, here you have somebody who's willing to give you a paying position, right, to actually better your situation, and they're giving it to you, out of function that they're friends with me and they believe that you could be a good fit, and you don't take the position, and yet you're still continuing to complain about your position. So do you actually even want a better outcome, right? What are you doing to get towards that better outcome, right? Are you more comfortable with your friend helping you out and you hitting me up and saying, hey, I can't make this bill right now, can you help me out? At some point, what are you going to do about it, right? And so those types of questions, those types of things, I start thinking about them, very hard, and I'm realizing, like, what's the outcome that a lot of these folks want in the first place. And it's not explained very well by, the, again, social justice warrior, stances and ideologies, right? It's not explained well by those. So, but I feel like I'm digressing a lot. So I guess just to answer to your question though, is I think you're probably right that most were already individualists. If I think about it a little harder. Sorry okay. For if I went on a tangent.
No, that was great. And Mr. Kaiser, I'm going to ask for your opinion about this, and then I'm going to say something else. But does the data show anything regarding this kind of the people who make it out are of a certain type, and that just is what it is? Is there data that suggests that, oh no, it's not really the type? Different kinds of people make it out, if you will.
Right. Okay, so yeah, the data suggests that there is a certain kind of type of people. So let's use the big five personality to try to break it down. So the openness, that one is correlated with of course IQ. So people who tend to be more open-minded tend to make it out because they're able to see and envision different pathways. But it's not just that; it's also people who tend to be conscientious. So you'd need someone like, for example, yourself, actually, someone who is conscientious, so they know the value of hard work, but someone who's also high enough IQ that they can actually perceive the different pathways to take. And if you juxtapose that, it tend to be people who are less agreeable as well. So agreeable people tend to not make out, even if they're high IQ, because they're trying to be within the confines of the community. They actually believe in their so-called community. They actually feel guilty to leave those behind in the community, so they'd rather kind of encapsulate themselves in that community. Perfect example is if I said Black Americans need to improve themselves, etc. I would get accused of being, let's say if I was Black American, self-hating. And that accusation of self-hating is the acknowledgement of there being a problem to begin with. So anyone who's agreeable to the community around them, they're going to be kind of held back within that community. It's almost like they're prevented from propelling forward. And those who are conscientious and less agreeable, they're willing to say, okay, well, I am going to leave some of my brothers or sisters behind, but I might actually be able to help more of them if I myself am successful. This is, in particular, an example can be given easily is the black tax. Black tax is the fact that when a person leaves the hood, he or she has to pay basically for the family members that are still in the hood. Now, this person might be wanting to buy a house, invest in his or her own envisions, but they can't because they're being expected to by the rest of the family to still support them. So then they're kind of stuck in that limbo. And the issue here is, of course, then that person isn't actually able to leave. They may not live in the hood, but they're still actually living in the hood because they can't actually create their own legacy. It's only the ones who are disagreeable that are then able to actually truly build a legacy for themselves across time.
I feel like Kaiser is a preacher right now. I'm just sitting here. I was muted. I'm just sitting here clapping because he's like hitting, like he's just hitting, like yes, 100%. Nailed it.
So we have someone to anecdotal evidence in the building. Now, one thing that you mentioned, Jonathan, earlier, or one thing that was that kind of came up as we had that conversation about you being, whether individual or not, you used to be an SJW and you changed. two things stood out to me. One was when you started saying, I don't know if I'm more of an individual person, something immediately struck me, which is you went, and then you actually then stated it, but not in so many words. You went to a more action-oriented position, right? A more, and shall we even say pragmatic, because pragmatic tends to be about that action stuff. Like you were like, okay, well, I'm not being more of an individualist mentally, but when I go into what are you gonna do about it rather than complain? Then you start taking action. And by the way, this action will almost automatically lead you closer to an individualist's path because only you as an individual can take action, right? Obviously, there are collective action and so on and so forth, but there is no collective brain or collective stomach, right? You're going to feel the urges, you're going to think the thoughts, you're going to take the action. And as you do more and more of that, when you get more and more action based, you just then tend to be what may be similar to somebody who was very individually driven to begin with, right? You guys may be walking side by side on the same path together.
Yeah, I think you're correct. So I think what's been kind of a struggle for me actually on this topic is that I do care about community, right? I do care about community. I do care about family. I do care about Black people, right? And so there's been kind of like I feel like it's an internal struggle where it's like I do want to help Black people. Let's just say, like, let's put it like that, right? I mean, I know that's a broad statement. I do want to help Black people. I do want to help my community. But one of the things I struggle with is am I here to be a martyr, or am I here to how if I want to actually help Black people, what are the ways I can do it? And do all these methods mean that I have to, for example, maintain this, because one of the things I think plagues a lot of the people that, like when I was an activist and, I mean, you could literally probably find photos of me as an activist, right? Like, and when I'm in that circle, and they would take this as an insult, but a lot of these folks, they have a victimhood mindset, right? And they can't see past that. It's actually kind of an interesting thing psychologically, like they can't see past that. And so for me, the struggle for me has been like, how do I progress, right? And how do I not put myself in a situation where I'm in a position where I'm not a victim. Like, let's just be real about it. Like, I'm in a much better position in my life than most people, that I grew up around, most people I know are, right? And especially at my age. And so I can't, if I'm sitting here, I'm being an activist and I'm doing this, and it's like, I feel like almost like a hypocrite to a certain extent, right? Because it's like, this is not me anymore. This is not, I'm in a better position. So rather than sitting here and forcing myself to be a victim or forcing myself to align with that mindset, why not figure out ways to actually, maybe in the long run, right, with a long-term plan or et cetera, et cetera. Like, why not figure out actual, practical ways that I can help my people, that I can help, Black people, that I can help my community. But there is this struggle. There's a struggle because, again, now most of those former friends, like, they view me as a sellout. Like, and I haven't even told them where I stand, but I mean, they clearly could tell that I'm not, I'm not doing the same things I was doing before, right? And so a lot of them, are, they see me as a sellout. They, I've heard all types of things, right? And it is a struggle. And so I think that's probably why it's hard for me to even say, I'm more individualistic, right? Because it almost feels like I'm stabbing my community in the back by saying that. Like, even though from an action standpoint,
yeah,
you're probably correct about that. That I've become more individualistic in a lot of ways, while still very focused on, at least in the long run, what are ways that I can help my community? What are ways that I can, and I've actually thought that through as well, right? And so it's not that I've like let them go or I've stopped thinking about the collective. Is that I want to be more, because I really do feel like the victimhood mindset is one thing that I wish we could rid Black people of this in America, right? Because I feel like it's at the root of so many struggles that Black people have in America. Because they can't psychologically, it's almost like psychologically, they cannot see past that. They cannot see past seeing themselves as a victim, or seeing, I shouldn't say themselves, I mean, I'm part of that community, like seeing ourselves as a victim. And so like, there are things you could do to advance your life that I feel like sometimes you won't even do it because you won't even try, right? You won't even try because you already see yourself failing in the first place, right? And so there's certain leaps that you wouldn't even take. There's certain things that you wouldn't even do because you already see yourself, failing. And just to finish off on that, because I don't want to keep going. I think a perfect example of this, Ike, is that beyond just being a software engineer, on the side I do real estate investing, right? And I try to introduce friends of mine, like people like other Black people, into this domain. And the number one thing I always hear is how they can't do it. Is how I don't have enough money. I don't know anything. And it's like, before they even try, right? Before they've even listened to me on how they could get into real estate investing so that they can build their net worth, so that they could do, they've already told themselves they can't do it. Once you've already told yourself that, you're not even going to try. You're not even going to once you've already told yourself, hey, I don't have enough money to invest in properties, then you won't even know there's a method called wholesaling. You won't even know there's like all these ways that you could actually make money doing this and build your funds, because you've already told yourself no. So the victimhood mindset, I feel like, is actually the biggest, in my opinion, personally.
I think he's just proved my point. Openness. Like, he's extremely open. Everything he's saying, all these ideas, is basically openness leading him to actually see the potential. But everybody else in his community can't quite see the same solutions. Everybody else is seeing dead ends. He's seeing the pathway across the maze. So although he's kind of calling it victimhood mentality, I think to these people, most of them, I don't think they can really see the pathway, because what you do is you show them the path down there and follow that path. They see a dead end with a strong light at the end, which they're blind to, rather than actually seeing the potential. So I think, yeah, it's an interesting phenomenon. But I had a similar friend. So he's high IQ. Actually, he was one of my students that I'm not going to mention. Anyways, so he's an high IQ guy. He came from the hood. Actually, his cousin unfortunately got killed 2 doors away from his house by accident, killed by the wrong people. Sorry, killed for something that he didn't do. It was an accidental kill by a gang. So the guy came from a very, very tough neighborhood. He was very intelligent in the sense that he got good grades. He went to study engineering. The issue is he didn't have openness. So what happened is he struggled because of his awkward personality. He's quite introverted, but he's also quite large Black man, so when he's doing interviews, especially when you have white female HR personalities interviewing him, let's just say he didn't pass any of them, even though he actually scored well in each of these interview tests in a technical sense. Now, the issue with him is when he couldn't pass it, he was unwilling to take any of the solutions that I gave him. I told him, okay, dude, why don't you just go work in your uncle's firm in like Ghana for like 2 years, get your experience. Once you have experience, you can bypass all these stupid interviews because you are now actually experienced. You have 2 years working as a management project, whatever, employing your actual skills. The issue is with him is what I realized with these people is they don't want a solution. They want a solution that they want, meaning they want to be able to win like everybody else that they see are winning in the same way that everybody else are winning. They're not willing to go do an extra work. They basically want to be the valued individual who's winning the system and win without having to try extra or going through any extra steps.
If I could put a slight pin on that, and then we'll get to Dr. Thunder. And there was something that you mentioned earlier, Jonathan. And when you guys need to go or whatever, feel free to let me know, or regarding how much time you have, blah, 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 right? There's something else you were mentioning, Jonathan, which has to do with, you changing your mind, right? And Kaiser alluded to it, and it may be part of the whole openness thing. But I wanted to ask a question about, certain philosophical points of view that have to do with that openness thing. So, but we have Dr. Thunder in the house. I need a button for you when you come in, Dr. Thunder. Like, what's up, man?
All right. So I just had a couple. This is a fascinating conversation, and I in the chat I was saying I was trying to fight off the urge to join the panel, and I was unsuccessful. And then somebody highlighted my name and put the chat right. I would put the StreamYard link right there. So it's gravitational pull. It pulled me in. Yeah. So there are a couple things, we're talking about this open mind, um, open mind, closed mind. We there's that's this sort of polar opposite is of an open mind is a closed mind, right?
Mhm.
And I think that there's a problem with the terminology. I think better terms would be like active and passive. So an active mind, one that actually processes information, no matter who it comes from, right? And weighs it against what they currently know to be true, and versus someone that with a passive mind that no matter what information comes by them, they're not going to grasp any of it. They're not going to uh, uh, give it an opportunity to supplant any of their previously held beliefs, right? So active and passive, I think those are better terms for what it is that we're talking about when we claim someone has an open mind or a closed mind, because you can be both active and closed on a particular issue, and you can be passive and open. You have a lot of people that are I sometimes I describe them as being atmospheric and one with the earth, and they kind of go where the wind blows, and they're open to everything, right? You ask them what kind of music they like. They like all kinds of music, and you can't pin them down to anything because they've not closed in on anything enough to be able to speak intelligently about it. And often it takes closing in on a particular idea to be able to analyze it closely enough so you understand how it actually works, right?
Let me ask you
So
this, if you don't mind, Dr. Thunder, at this point, because you've been circling around the point that I was saying I was going to bring up next. So I'm going to just start it with you. And I know that you had other things to say, but most likely the other things that you have to say will fit into the answer to this particular question, which is this.
sure.
We have been talking about this openness. I said that Jonathan said something about changing his mind about his ideas, going where the evidence leads, so on and so forth. Then there is kind of, let's say, out there in the world of philosophical stances, right? There is the position of, I don't really believe that there is meaning or right, the good, the true, and the beautiful. I'm doubtful about it. I'm skeptical about it. Let's go all the way from a pure postmodernist kind of hardcore critique to just maybe a little bit of skepticism or maybe a little bit of a belief in the irrational, like Nietzsche or so on and so forth. But what I'm saying is this: is there a correlation between that kind of openness and then also having this kind of a philosophical belief? Or should I ask, how can one have this kind of an openness, okay, and still have some kind of a hard belief vis-a-vis, is there meaning, is there not, is there true, is there not, is there, so how can you have both? And I'll ask you, Dr. Thunder, to address that first.
Yeah. So this is interesting because my beliefs, my views have changed dramatically over the course of my life, and I'm 46. This year, this last since we've been in this pandemic, my positions have changed pretty dramatically on several things. And yeah, that's interesting. I think that you have to have something to stand on, and okay, I'll use this illustration, and this actually was the the second thing I was going to bring up. So, the wheel in a car, right? The steering wheel. The steering wheel in a car is of no use if the car is not moving. Okay, so you have to at least make the commitment to start the car and go in some direction, right? Now, the wheel in the car is such a powerful tool, powerful instrument, has such a powerful capability that even if you're going in dead the wrong direction, exactly the opposite direction of the way that you intend to go or that you want to go, the steering wheel will get you going in the right direction, or has the capability of getting you going in the right direction. And it's using momentum that you're generating in the wrong direction in order to create the power to turn into the right direction. So sometimes you just have to go someplace and you have to be heading in some direction. And I think the commitment to go in some kind of direction is a powerful thing, because it can lead you to go all kinds of places you had no idea about. Your intention was just to go. I heard you say something, maybe this was a couple days ago, something like, let's see, you don't necessarily have to have the right intention. Just get them in there, and you might start doing something for the wrong reason. But then once you're actually doing it, then then you can get rid of those wrong intentions, and now you're in the now you're doing the right things, right? I think it's like that. And so I may make a commitment because I feel like this is the direction. Everything that I know leads me to believe that this is correct. But as I'm going in that direction, I'm just aware of what's going on. I'm not blind, right? I'm not deaf. I can use my senses to steer me, to tell me, hey, something's awry or something else is possible, and then I can go in that direction. That's the power of the wheel.
So I have something. Oh, go ahead. I start.
Oh, no, I was just about to say, vis-a-vis the question that was asked right before, then get reactions to what you said, because the question again was, what is the relationship between this particular psychological predisposition to be open and also taking ideas in? You mentioned active. Also, I mentioned now a philosophical disposition that says I'm skeptical about things. But the question is, how can one be open, skeptical, but still also, is it possible to have a fastidious believer in X, but also is open? And I think that Dr. Thunder kind of laid out something about, it's almost like the fastidiousness or / the faith is about heading in a direction, right? That you do have to just head in a direction. That is almost the belief side. And then from there, you use the open side to try to figure it out. It's almost like you believe like a Platonist. You believe in the true, the good, and the beautiful. It's up there. But you live like a nihilist in the sense that you don't know that you know the truth. I mean, it'll be rather, rather arrogant for you to think that you know the truth, right?
Right. That's right.
So I actually have an answer to that question. Like for myself personally, for myself, I actually have a framework of how I approach this. So The number one thing for me is if I can't defend the stance, then I shouldn't believe in it, right? So that's the number one thing for me is if I hold a stance, then I should be able to defend it. The second thing for me is that I believe in strong opinions held loosely, right? So I mentioned this earlier. So, I can form a strong opinion about something, but I'm open to data. I'm open to, a different perspective that makes me, think harder about it, and I'm open to change my mind. Another thing is I'm very afraid of the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? I'm very afraid of that, because a lot of times I think because you don't know what you don't know, right?
Explain the effect to our listeners.
So it's just basically, and I'm probably gonna mess this up, but in terms of my articulation of this, but essentially, for me though, I guess my understanding of it is that I'm afraid of the unknowns, right? I'm afraid that once you have elementary knowledge of something, right? A lot of times, because you start understanding something, you can get to a point where you believe that you understand it well enough, and you understand that you're very competent at it, and where you may actually not be, right? And so for me, because I know that that's a thing, I know that that's a place where you can be. I'm very careful about that, and that actually forces me to be very forever curious, right? And so one of the things one of the actual practical ways I apply this in my life is, even when we're talking about religion, right? Like I actually, I try to learn as much as I can about as many religions and traditions as possible, right? Whether it's, talking to my friends who grew up Nation of Islam, or my friends who are just, not Nation of Islam, but regular Muslims, or etc. And then Christians and Buddhists. And I try to understand as many perspectives as possible, and then try to see where at least based on where I'm at in my life at the moment, where I stand. And if I have questions, I ask questions to the people that I feel can actually answer those questions, right? And so I'll go to the experts. And another practical way I apply this in my life is, as a software engineer, when I'm solving a problem, like if I'm trying to figure out how to solve a specific engineering problem, a lot of times people will just go, and I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, but a lot of times people will just Google the problem and try to see if they find an answer on a site called Stack Overflow. Whereas for me, one of the things that I do that most of my colleagues find very strange, actually, is I'll actually go on Google Scholar and I'll read academic papers, right, on a particular problem. And so this is not something that a lot of software engineers do, but for me personally, I like understanding the intuition that drove this, that brought you the solution. Whereas if you just go on Stack Overflow, you see the end result code. You see, okay, this is what you should do, but I don't want to just know what I should do. I want to know how you arrived at that, right? And so so I'll go and I'll actually read, some academic paper on a specific solution, let's say to distributed systems or whatever, and I'll go and I'll read the paper in order to understand it. So for me, understanding is key, because then once I write that code, back to the first thing I said is, if I can't defend my stance, in this case, my code, my algorithm, if I can't defend it, then why did I choose this algorithm, right? Why did I choose to write it in this manner? So I hope that answers your question. So in other words, I don't want to be the guy who's just very wavy and just very malleable and has no real positioning. But at the same time, I don't want to be the very stubborn person that is unable to receive new information and change their mindset and their perspective on things as that new information either proves them wrong or maybe makes them understand different ideas better, et cetera, et cetera.
Kaiser. Okay. Now, what do you have to say on this, and then on the basic proposition, which I've been trying to test out here? Is it the only solution, by the way, just by any chance? It seems like, okay, well, there is no way to, or
no, there is a way.
Advantage? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Right. Okay. So, I want to start by saying, actually, so to kind of answer your original question about the self-selection mechanism, you are correct. It is a self-select group of people that usually leave certain situations and find ways out. And you alluded to it being maybe predicated on individualism. And in your particular point to your personality type, yes, mine, yes, Dr. Thunder, yes, we're all intuitive thinkers, me, you, and Dr. Thunder. However, Jonathan is an intuitive feeler. So he's actually constrained by the community's wants and needs, but it's the intuition. So it's the openness that is really the kind of fundamental component mixed with the hard workness, conscientiousness. So instead of being individualistic, I think that's what attaches me, you, and Thunder to have, moved from certain situations. But I think that the more kind of core principle would be intuition and hard work. So conscientiousness and intuition. Those are the main things. It's just that if you're also disagreeable like we are, it makes it easier because we don't really care so much about other kids, alienating us from the so-called superficial aspects of a communal interaction, calling us, oh, you sound white, you're not cool, you're just trying to be like that. To us, that doesn't matter, all the shaming tactics, etc. So I would like to kind of put that as, as a propositional solution to that kind of endeavor. But to be specific to the point that you made and what Dr. Thunder said and Jonathan is, Jonathan seems like he's a modernist, actually. He's a modernist. So he believes in that truth can be found through axiomatic propositions of logic, evidence. And that's why he was able to leave the social justice warrior community, because he's realized that they weren't moved by the same principles. He realized that they weren't actually necessarily seeking a solution. It was actually a religious kind of psychological movement that they were seeking. They were seeking to find a person to blame, some evil system that was there that was a reason for all their failures, as opposed to actually alleviating their situations themselves. And that's what made him move on, because he's a modernist. So actually, in terms of being open and still finding a philosophical position, he was able to find one, and he's a modernist. Dr. Thunder, he's like a pragmatic nihilist in a sense. And in my case, right, so it appears that each of us is being ruled by something. Something fundamental is ruling us. We're all slaves to something. Jonathan is, truth, logic, and having a reason. See, he didn't specify whether that reason was necessarily true in the truest sense. It had to be something that could be shown that it works. So, for example, the coding, that when he actually tries that solution, not only can he solve the problem right now, but also solve other problems when he abstracts it. So it had to be a solution that was met the actual problem in this particular circumstance. So, and also he would try to not allow himself to be caught up in the whole so-called Dunning-Kruger effect, which does happen to all of us at some point. We become we even in my PhD, when I started, I thought I was like, I thought I was the smartest person. Then I realized, no, I'm actually one of the dumbest people, until I actually then truly became an expert at the end of the PhD. So it was like certain points you delude yourself into thinking that you know enough. Then you realize, if you seek deeper, that actually there's more to know. So in the end, you realize that your moral and ethics propositions are actually based on tentative axiomatic markers based on what you're seeking to do in that moment. There is no all-encompassing axioms that you can use. You can only use the axioms of, we have this problem right now. This problem is connected to these other problems right now. Therefore, this is the best solution based on the kind of problem that we have, based on the things that this other problem is linked to, and the potential variable consequences that it might ensue to the whole system as a whole. So capitalism seems to be the best system right now that we have in order to solve the problems whereby we have enough freedom, we have enough blah, 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 blah. That's kind of how we can still be open, but allow there to be a system, because ultimately a system is going to be false. And we know this by any kind of means of abstraction. So I guess the only thing that matters is the slave. Are you slave to reason, like Jonathan is? Are you slave to the journey, like I am? Or are you a slave to ideation, like you are? It seems like we're all slaves to something. Some people are slaves to now the communal feelings. Who are we as a people? What do we mean in this community? Hence, that's why you get that collectivistic, religious, social justice thing growing, is that to them, they've become slaves to the noble victim. That's now their God.
The noble victim. That is That is very interesting and very. I like how you all you pin all of us down. You got our numbers. You got the car. You but okay, you did and you did this because of that. And well, that's rather good. I would like to first of all, I like the way you put it in that rather Jordan B. Peterson. At least I don't know if this is a Peterson or anything, but like Jordan Peterson likes to talk about that framework, motivational frameworks, right?
Mm.
Like what is reality? It kind of has to have some kind of at least because this is subjective reality. We're kind of at least talking about, right?
Right.
Because that's kind of how you made that move when you said, "Hey, the only way is the axioms of what we're doing right now, okay, within this framework, motivationally, whatever, psychologically, whatever it may be, right?" But you have completely, maybe because Immanuel Kant convinced you that looking at trying to go metaphysical, right, in terms of the nature of reality in and of itself is foolhardy. Would you say that, Kaiser? That just came to mind.
Um, I would say yes if we are considering things with practical implications on this realm. So,
Okay.
right. So I wouldn't I wouldn't discount it in tandem, but if it's related to something that has consequences to the physical space reality, then yes, it is a foolhardy proposition.
It's almost like the most political way of saying somebody is full of shit. It's like, well, your Majesty, if what you just said has no bearing whatsoever on reality, then it's fine.
In
But
theory,
exactly. So, but yes, you just kind of pretty much quite just summarized Kant's argument, right? Which is that, well, if you're going to be talking about the tools, of perception, even like, because, he's looking at space time almost like a tool, right? Space time causality and how we gather the information, so on and so forth, is a box. You cannot use the tools of that box outside the box.
right.
You cannot reason outside the box because the box and reason go together. You can't
Exactly.
be reasoning about, what happened
A
before the
square
Big Bang.
circle, for example.
Yes, time before time,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So definitely, great conversation, great guests. Okay, I'm gonna do a quick recap of what this conversation was sort of about, and that's why I picked the topic. The topic was just because. Okay, and I knew that just because has many avenues to bring up many kind of philosophical conversations. One of which was the responsibility aspect. Okay, you take full responsibility when you say just because. We talked about Adam and Eve, and Adam blaming Eve, and Eve blaming the serpent, and the serpent was like, "What's up, God? You know how we roll around here. I did it. Just because. What's your move, right?" It's your turn. So that kind of responsibility, which also comes with power, and then the doing things just because, going to the moon just because, so on and so forth, is actually, I think, evolutionarily adaptive in the sense that it allows you to widen your net for some inevitable thing that may come, or allows you to find some new orchards with new low hanging fruit. Again, it may be new orchards in the space of scientific knowledge, or it could be literally going to the next continent over just because, right?
Yeah.
You think scientifically just because, you go to the next continent just because, and boom, you found some new technology, boom, you found some new literal orchard, right? And then there is the last part, which is like there is a YOLO aspect, which is different from, I like to kind of differentiate from the just because YOLO is still a reason. YOLO says because you only live once, and it's not, that still hasn't gone down to full responsibility yet. You're still not being responsible if you're in the YOLO landscape, but generally speaking, there is a no regrets and actions of kindness, of generosity, of gratitude should be shown. Okay, like now, the whole thing about people getting flowers after they're dead, right? So
Right.
doing those kinds of things also just because, I think, is a good admonishment, right?
Mm.
I'm not the the touchy feely type, so I'm not going to stress too much on the kindness. But that is also a part of it. We tend to want to be kind and and give just because, and it brings us joy and so on and so forth. So the just because, let's get to the just because of the axiomatic, because just because is axiomatic, and let's get to the just because allows us to be
Right.
kind and evolutionarily beneficial. So I'll give you guys the last word on this. First of all, Jonathan, if you would like to take us out, and then Kaiser.
Sure. Well, I mean, I just want to say thank you for having me on. Like I said, I didn't even expect to be on here. I was coming from another video, and then YouTube notifications, told me that Ike was on, so I had to come on. Um, I did have like I don't know if you just want me to close off, but I did have like one example actually that came to mind, one final example that came to mind of what we were just discussing earlier, that I wanted to bring up, which in my opinion is a perfect example of. So can I go ahead?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So a perfect example that I just thought of is recently I saw somebody post something. It was a friend of mine. They posted something where it was about like something SpaceX did, right? And this was one of my former friends. I guess I can say former friends. One of my former social justice warrior friends, and he posted that with all this money that Elon Musk has, he could essentially hypothetically end poverty, and he could do all this and that, right? And this kind of like, to me, immediately I thought again about the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Because this individual, right, they kind of look at and somebody like Elon Musk, and they're like, this guy has all this money and he could do all of this, right? But what they don't know, for example, is that Elon Musk only has all that money via his net worth, right? That money is not liquid, right? Most of Elon Musk, and he's actually explained this before, where like most of, in fact, he's had to use his SpaceX to actually use SpaceX shares as collateral to basically take out loans so that he could function, like, right? And so, but the average person doesn't have a real understanding of net worth, right? And liquidity and non-liquidity, right? And so in their mind, it's like, this guy's a billionaire. He could theoretically do this, right? But to do that, he would essentially have to get rid of all his shares, right? And then turn that money liquid. So it's just something I thought of, right? It's like you see that post, and at surface level, it sounds like it makes sense, right? At surface level, it sounds like it makes sense because you could just say Elon Musk net worth on Google, and it'll tell you he's a billionaire, right? But but once you dig into that, and you realize, well, what's the liquidity on that? Then you realize, okay, you don't really know much about what you're talking about, essentially, right? And so this was an example I thought of because it was like one of the more recent instances of this that I came across. But anyway, thank you for having me on. This was a really good topic, and Kaizo, fantastic analysis. I think you nailed you nailed everything that you said about me. So thank you for your perspective on this.
All right. Yeah, don't worry. I've been psychoanalyzing people for a while, so I think I spent more time than my PhD learning about that.
Good. So take us out, Mr. Kaiser.
Yeah, actually, just to talk about what he mentioned there about the billionaire effect thing is actually, even if he did have liquid funds, you can't solve poverty that way because you could feed them for a time. The moment that money runs out, the people are still poor. So you'd have to change the mentality of those people, teach them how to actually navigate in a capitalistic system effectively, and also learn about competition. So there's just so much you'd have to teach these poor people that the money itself would only alleviate the symptoms, but not eradicate the actual disease, which is the mindset. So yeah, that's like taking on that point even to to the next point as well. And in terms of everything discussed here, it seems as though it is mostly a select sort of group of people that tend to succeed when they're outside an unpredictable environment. So, people who are born with silver spoons with their mouth, they tend to follow the path of least resistance towards success with minimal consequences. Those who come from a more kind of harsh environment, they only have a few options, and you do have to have a certain kind of personality type that allows you to A, see the solutions, B, be willing to walk through the doors of that solutions, C, be willing to have the negative aspects, be it social or cultural, like Jonathan had to go through in order to overcome that and actually be successful. And then D, you have to also have the willingness to remove that natural inclination towards blame mechanics. From my experiences, it seems like a lot of people like to blame things, and I've tried to explain to them that blame is meaningless because it doesn't exist, right? You have laws that if you catch the criminal, they will be punished. Whether you blame them or not doesn't change the reality of things, but you are the one who suffers the consequences of those actions by others. So you ultimately are the only person who can change your own reality. So the issue is the blame mechanics only operates because of the way we are. We are a collectivistic creature. So we kind of feel like there's some kind of, we don't separate the feeling of, we want community versus the reality that this is not a true objective thing that actually exists in this world. That distinction or lack of distinction is really what kind of gets us into this weird blame mechanic circle. And unfortunately, that's what happens. You get some people who get caught up in it. They end up becoming religious participants in the noble victim problem, and then to them they actually believe that there's something wrong, in the sense they like to say this thing. They say you shouldn't do this, or this shouldn't be the case, and they think a should argument is the same as an is argument. They can't separate the two. To them, the metaphysical, and this is where you asked me the question about the Kantian argument there. It's like, should you focus on the metaphysics of the metaphysics, or should you focus on things that only have a tangible consequence? This is the issue. Those who do focus on the metaphysics of empathy and emotion make should arguments. Things shouldn't be like this, and they project that should as if it is the same as an is argument that is bound by objective facts and tangible aspects. Unfortunately, those who can't make the distinction, they get caught up in whatever the social cultural norm is, and if they're lucky and they are in a rich environment, they succeed. If they're unlucky and they're in a so-called failed environment, unfortunately, they become the norm in that participation as well.
Hey Ike, is it possible? I know you want to end, but Kaiser just said something that I really wanted to touch on. If possible, if not, that's fine. If not, we could end it here.
Go ahead.
Okay, so again, Kaiser, I think you're nailing it. So one of the things that you just made me think of is which is kind of funny given the conversation I had with I think Lion Legal earlier. One of the phenomenons that I see with, again, a lot of my former, I keep saying former friends just because they call me sellouts and whatnot, but a lot of them are socialists, right? And a lot of them are socialists and have very socialist views. And one of the things I came to notice, and actually one of the reasons why, one of the things that started pushing me a little bit more away from that is the fact that I found them to fall into two categories most of the time, right? Where when I would question, their beliefs, because again, I try to approach things from a pros and cons and what's the truth, etc. And one of the things I would find is there's a category of them who have never thought past let's say you get what you want, right? Let's say you get what you're saying should exist. What next, right? And when I would ask that question, there's a category of them that's never thought that far. And then on the opposite side, there's a category of them where they were purely theoretical about everything. So it was like that category, that side would be the side that, they've read Marx and Lenin, and they would go on and on about the theory, right? But it'd be like, okay, in reality, like in practice, how would this work, right? Like, how would you actually have a socialist society, in America? Let's say you say, okay, America, is gonna, fall, and the empire is gonna fall, and we're gonna have a revolution. Okay, let's say we have that. What next? And there's a side that it's just, they've never thought that far. You realize that immediately when you ask them that. And there's a side where they get into all the theory of, this is what Marx said, this is what, and it's very interesting to me, right? Because both of them, and what you end up realizing is both of them are not really based in reality, right? Most of them are not based in reality and don't have an actual practical like stance, right? It may sound good in theory, right? Like at surface level, it may sound good if you come from poverty, if you come from the hood, to see everybody in a better position. But what comes with that? What are the trade-offs? What's the pros and what's the cons? What actually happens next? And it's very fascinating to me that most people haven't thought that far.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That seems like it's a common trope. I just, yeah. Well, what I'm thinking is a lot of them get caught up in the ideation, in the possession. That's it. They get possessed by an idea. That idea then takes hold of them, and that idea explains many of the reasons why they're suffering. And oh yeah, this is a point I guess we can touch on a different day. But one really interesting thing is actually there's usually a parallel of both realism and also projection. So what I mean here is that sometimes there really are people who are struggling and suffering because of the system. For example, Black people in many parts of the world, they're really being racially profiled, being prevented from entering certain areas, etc. So sometimes there's actual real actual nefarious systems that are in place to hold people back. This has been represented in reality many times. The issue is that sometimes the arguments that they use to kind of project their social justice is irrelevant of this fact. So it's interesting because they will still make that argument even if that systemic oppression existed or not existed. It almost seems like the systemic oppression is just an excuse for them to have that kind of noble victim status, but it's not really the reason. Now, the issue here, of course, is difficult because then there are some people who truly, like you, for yourself, for example, who truly want to alleviate that nefarious aspect and then have a fair playing ground. And there are also some people who just don't care, and that's it. Really, what I found that's interesting. There's that parallel of there's a real problem here. We're focusing on it, and then other people don't really care whether there's a real problem or not. It's an excuse for them to have that position,
or even caring about how their position may actually perpetuate what they're actually fighting, right? Like they may actually perpetuate this. Like and I'm gonna end with this. Like in corporate America, you see nowadays it's very fashionable. And I could get in trouble for saying this, but I mean it's the truth. Like it's very fashionable to have these diversity and inclusion departments now, right? Where but the reality is, for example, as a software engineer, I would never join a company through their diversity and inclusion department. I will go through, I want to get hired the same way everybody else gets hired, right? Because what they don't think about is when you join through the diversity and inclusion, now your colleagues, they see you as a quota hire, right?
Yep.
Do you actually get better treatment or worse treatment? Like, do your colleagues resent you or do they like you, right? Did you actually solve the problem or did you just make it worse? And did you prolong it by creating a department that basically essentially necessitates that the problem exists, right? Like if you create a whole department, and I'm not saying the problem shouldn't be solved. I'm just saying, have we thought about what we're saying is a solution, right? Have we thought about actually how we're approaching it? Like, have we thought, again, what next? Essentially is what I'm saying. Have we thought about the next, like what that actually brings next? Or do we just say, this is a solution and we just go with it without thinking about the side effects of it, essentially? Anyway, I'm gonna end right here. Sorry.
Yeah, you guys will go on and on and on forever. And I am grateful, by the way, for the contribution. And I would like to say that, both of you guys should have joined when I did the conversation or the monologue. I think some people came into yesterday about whom you are, because this idea of idea possession, right, which is just another way of saying that we all have a story. We all have a story that gives us status and certain other things. It also is a motivator. It does do things in the world. And perhaps is there a reason for it? Reason being a use for it. Use being what it is best for, as opposed to all the possible things that it is good for, right? A spoon is good for many things, but it is best for something, right? So that was the kind of the exploration yesterday as to, well, the self, the image, the story. And obviously it is something that I'll bring back in other forms. I just wanted to put out the general idea of my general hypothesis is that whole story exists mainly for values, what we may call values. which basically is how do you make a choice? Okay, what's the what are the ends being pursued here? What's the hierarchy? How do you make choices, right? And that's what your story is for. But then we add all these other things to it, and we add material things to it to give us status. We add my victimhood story, my survivor story, whatever the stories are with many plots and subplots. We throw it in there, and then we leave ourselves open to attack, basically. So my whole practical thing is you don't want to be open to attack. You want to build a nice, slim little fortress that doesn't have all this baggage around it. That is just a way of your ego being attacked. And where your ego can be attacked, you can also be controlled from there. One and the same thing, right? So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna put our guests aside until next time, and I'm gonna answer the question the gentleman raised here. That's on the yes. When I do have panels, they are open, but no, it's not a free for all, and it is yes always rational. And if it starts getting derailed, I will put a stop to any derailment. So, generally speaking, I tend to come out here and I have a hypothesis. I say, well, this is something, or this is a general idea, or it may just be an imagery, right? An analogy, right? So I paint an image and then I say, well, what do you guys think about this analogy? Does it work? So on and so forth. And then people come in, and it's a self-selecting group, people who were going to come in to try to take down a hypothesis, have to be generally rational. But yes, the big hammer of the moderator will come down, and anyone trying to derail anything over here, ladies and gentlemen. So, ladies and gentlemen, shout out to everybody in the house. Gerald asked the question. Shout out to everybody in the house. Shout out to everybody in the house. What I would tell 18 to 19-year-old self is just keep doing, because the only way, just like Dr. Thunder was saying earlier, is to get in the vehicle and get in a particular direction. Go in a particular direction. Okay? If you're going completely wrong, as he referenced, you can use the steering wheel and turn around. So keep moving, keep going, keep doing. And if you are at all alive, you will learn from that. By that I mean taking action and bumping into the universe, bumping into the social realities, bumping into the realities of your own psyche, the limitations that you have, and trying to overcome those, overcoming external limitations, social, economic, technological, so on and so forth. This is how you learn, right? Automatically will happen. So I will tell myself, yes, keep going, keep doing. I've always been a doer, but wasn't so sure about it back then. Wasn't so sure about should I be knowing completely what I'm doing or where I'm going. It's not so important. And that's a message to me, because I am my type of person. Not everybody, some people perhaps, I would therefore say, need to know where they're going and need to know why they're doing what they're doing. For me, not so much. I don't need to know. Not in a very true sense, anyways. I have a antenna that is up there that is picking up the signal of where the right direction is. But I don't really need to know. So I would tell myself, yes, keep doing, keep on doing. So let's go fourth and fifth. We're going forth and we're fighting the battle within. This was a stream on just because. Just because is a question that we should ask ourselves, or we should ask ourselves questions until we get to the point where we have to say just because. Because just because I did it, I am, I will, I just did it just because is your point of power. It's also your point of full responsibility. every other thing else, a reason which is based on some value system, which you could later on then say the value system was imposed upon you by your mother, your tribe, your church, whatever, and therefore you have all this resentment, right? The antidote to resentment is to get to the point where you are knowing the things that you're doing just because, right? Ask yourself why. Why do I do this? Well, because of that. Why do I do that? Because of that. Well, because this person said. And then get to the point, the bottom where it's just, well, because I wanted to, because I chose to, because that is who I am. That's who I want to be. This gives you full accountability, full responsibility, full power, and a full antidote against future resentment. Because resentment is what happens when later in the future, you're going to start blaming everybody for everything that quote unquote happened. Just because it's also necessary for development, for pushing the envelope, for you go down to the bottom of the ocean because it's there. Because it's there sentiment, because it's there. Just because. Go ahead and do it. Also, life is short. Life is short, ladies and gentlemen. And as we close out, I would like to thank everyone for showing up. Again, my name is Ike, and this is my channel. Over here, we talk about being better and doing better with a strong emphasis on doing. And the information is presented in a simple, measurable, intuitive, and actionable way, ladies and gentlemen. And as we go out, we shall play our theme song, Battle Within. I'm out here in Los Angeles. Thank you very much for spending this evening with me. Shout out to everyone in the chat. Nicer, always holding it down. Dr. Thunder, L. Boyd, Young Swift from earlier on. Peace.
On the shore, relentless in the war, the legions in our hearts, shed waters in our balls, the spirit and the flesh, the emotions that arrest, the cerebral will contest, propelling the unrest. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand, stand up, make we burn Babylon. Guess I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Trembling in the haze with the semblance of a blaze, with gratitude and rage, we touch another page with delirious delight, impervious to light. This vitality and might encourages the flight. Preachers and bandits with means underhanded, the teachers pedantic and lack understanding. So sweep out the sand with the broom in your hand, stand up, make we burn Babylon. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. But the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within. Cause I can give the world to you, but the falling of the curtain is for certain. Be careful where you're lurking, demons searching. The spirit and the women fight the battle within.